Let's face it, nobody is ever going to call Batman well-adjusted. He dresses up like a rodent and fights crime. He hangs out in a cave with an old man and a rotating bunch of kids. He picks fights with Superman. Oh, and he's got a serious ego problem too. Everything has to be a Batmobile, a bat plane, or a bat signal. Even his dog is a bat hound, and not, say, just a regular dog. Still, there's a difference between charmingly eccentric and outright crazy, and every now and then, Batman crosses that line. Here are some of the most terrible things Batman's ever done.
Oh, are you here for some...
He left a villain to starve. The late 80s villain, the KG Beast, has become a fan favorite thanks to his ridiculous name and delightfully dated Cold War gimmick. But his first appearance ends in one of Batman's all-time cruelest acts. In Batman number 420, KG Beast attempts to assassinate President Reagan. So Batman chases him through Gotham sewers, clobbers him with a soggy corpse he finds there, which seriously raises questions about Gotham's toilets, and herds the Beast into an empty room. When KG Beast sees that he's cornered, he turns and challenges Batman to a fight. But Batman just closes the door and blocks it off, making it impossible to open, leaving KG Beast to die in a rat-infested tomb. Justifying his actions, Batman thinks,
"I'm not in this business to protect the rules. I serve justice."
It's just too bad that the rule that Batman is breaking is the one about, not killing people. Even later writers were horrified. To make him less of a murderous maniac, eventually they wrote a story where Batman revealed that he'd actually called the cops after trapping the Beast, who managed to escape anyhow. He re-orphaned Robin. You could argue that subjecting troubled teens to dangerous training exercises and then sending them out to fight psychopaths is terrible all on its own. And, well, you wouldn't be wrong. Yet that's hardly the worst thing Batman has done to his Robins. For example, in the Silver Age comic book World's Finest number 153, billed on the cover as an imaginary novel, as though all the other comic books actually happened, Bruce Wayne becomes convinced that Superboy killed his parents and plots his revenge against the last son of Krypton. When Robin protests, Batman slaps him so viciously that the smack traveled through time and became an internet meme in the future. When Robin won't relent, Batman sits him in a chair and uses a villain's hypnosis machine to erase all of Dick Grayson's memories before dropping him off at an orphanage so he won't get in the way. Of course, Superboy didn't kill the Waynes, and a guilt-stricken Batman sacrifices his life to save Superman. But nobody tells Robin, who presumably languishes in the orphanage until he's old enough to live on his own and become an accountant or something. Even in the regular comic continuity, Robins get a raw deal. Batman doesn't intervene in time when Robin number 2, Jason Todd, is beaten half to death with a crowbar by the Joker, and then killed in an explosion. Later, Batman admits Jason was too young and impulsive to be Robin, but that didn't stop Bruce from slapping a mask on him anyway. It happened again in 2013 when an assassin killed the 5th Robin, Damian Wayne. You'd think that a smart guy like Batman could get it together, but it actually gets worse. He got Robin's girlfriend killed. In 2004, the 3rd Robin, Tim Drake, hung up his cape after his father discovered his secret identity. In Robin number 126, Stephanie Brown, Robin's long-term girlfriend and a vigilante herself, sews her own Robin costume and sneaks into the Batcave, hoping to gank Tim's old gig. Batman hires her on the spot, not because Stephanie's qualified for the position or anything, but so he can make Tim jealous. Stephanie does the best she can, but her career as Robin ends just 2 issues later when Batman fires her for disobeying orders. In order to earn back Batman's trust, Stephanie sets one of Bruce's top-secret agendas into motion, starting a gang war that's supposed to unite all of Gotham's criminals under the control of Matches Malone, one of Batman's undercover aliases. It doesn't work, and violence consumes the city. For her mistakes, Stephanie is captured by the Black Mask, one of Gotham's gang leaders, and fatally tortured. All for the love of Batman. He became a drug addict on purpose. What happens when Batman can't get the job done? He resorts to substance abuse. In Legends of the Dark Knight number 16, a young girl drowns when Batman can't lift a boulder that traps her in a flooded tunnel. He decides he isn't strong enough, and when a few extra hours of CrossFit don't cut it, he starts taking steroids to enhance his strength. The problem, other than the fact that drugs are, usually kinda terrible, is that the stuff Batman takes is the same junk that gives Bane his super strength, and that doesn't always end well. Batman juices himself enough to throw a refrigerator through a brick wall, but he also develops a nasty mean streak. Once Batman is totally addicted, the scientist providing him with venom says that he'll need to kill Commissioner Gordon if he wants any more pills. Gordon lives, obviously, and Alfred locks Batman in the Batcave for a month while he detoxes using sheer bat willpower and the power of the Batbeard. Now recovered, Batman eventually tracks down the scientist to shut the operation down, no drugs required, and arrests him fair and square. He sent a guy to die in space. Lord Deathman, as the name kind of implies, always comes back from the dead.
Batman and Robin once again triumphed over their archenemy, Lord Deathman, after he returned from the grave.
Given that Batman doesn't usually kill, that shouldn't be a problem. Most of the time, he just locks his villain away in Arkham Asylum and prays they won't get out. But for some reason, Batman decides to deal with Lord Deathman in a much more permanent manner in Batman Incorporated number 2. He seals the villain in a rocket and launches him into space, where he'll spend the rest of time completely alone. Lord Deathman's casually cruel fate is made especially weird in the comic's final panels, when Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle calmly share a drink while Lord Deathman's ship twinkles in the sky above, beginning its long journey towards absolutely nowhere, or until it runs into one of the billions and billions of aliens that populate the DC universe, which it does. Nice job, Batman. He made plans to kill his teammates. JLA's Tower of Babel arc shows what happens when a supervillain discovers Batman's plans for beating his Justice League teammates, and the results aren't pretty. After some bad guys temporarily switch bodies with the Justice League, Batman decides to keep detailed files about every League member, including ways to bring them down. Unfortunately, those files fall into the hands of Ra's al Ghul, who promptly uses them in a bid to take over the world. Things go bad pretty quickly. Aquaman receives a custom dose of the Scarecrow's fear gas, making him terrified of water, which he needs to survive. Hypnotic suggestion blinds Green Lantern, robbing him of the ability to control his power ring. Superman's skin turns translucent thanks to some red kryptonite, which kicks his solar receptors into overdrive, causing unimaginable pain. A custom-made bullet gives Flash paralyzing seizures. Understandably, everyone gets pretty mad at old Batman. They hold a vote about keeping him on the team, and Batman just cuts out before they get to make the choice.
If you people can't see the potential danger of an out-of-control Justice League, I don't need to wait for a vote. I don't belong here.
He punks out. Batman needs Gotham City, and Gotham City needs Batman. Just look at what happens when he's not around. In Batman Beyond, the Dark Knight hangs up the cape and cowl after having a heart attack mid-fight and being forced to aim a gun at a criminal to prevent his death. Decades after Bruce Wayne's retirement from the nightlife, Gotham City falls into the hands of a clown-themed street gang called the Jokers. Fortunately, Amanda Waller made a secret contingency plan for the Caped Crusader, ensuring that a new, younger hero would inherit the mantle of Batman. And then there's The Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller's infamous take on Batman's ultimate future. Batman gives up after Jason Todd's death, and in his absence, a gang called the Mutants transform Gotham City into a war-torn dystopia. With old man Bruce brooding in Wayne Manor for a decade, Superman becomes a pawn of the government, superherodom gets outlawed, and, as expected, crime is on the rise everywhere. You know who could have stopped all this from happening? Batman. Bruce Wayne dedicated his life to keeping Gotham City safe and spent years protecting the city. It's hardly a surprise that Gotham came to rely on him. It's even arguable that Batman's presence in Gotham entices supervillains looking for a challenge. Suddenly, disappearing isn't just irresponsible, retiring is, quite literally, the worst thing that Batman could possibly do. Well, retiring or doing more of this in public.
For a guy whose job description is literally crime fighter, Batman sure does spend an awful lot of time fighting other heroes. You'd think having an entire asylum full of homicidal clowns, living refrigerators, and the occasional immortal bioterrorist would keep him busy enough. But no, every now and then some well-meaning do-gooder gets in his way, and it's on. Batman has a pretty strong track record against his fellow heroes. Here are just a few who have felt the wrath of the Bat. Superman. Historically speaking, Batman and Superman have been best friends, and the world's finest crime-fighting team since they met in the mid-40s. They share a mutual desire to devote their lives to helping others, but like all friends, they occasionally have their disagreements. We're willing to bet that most arguments between pals don't usually devolve into one person using a radioactive space rock to poison the other, but these guys don't really seem like the calm and reasonable types. The two heroes most famously came to blows at the climax of The Dark Knight Returns, in which an aging, post-retirement Batman enlists the help of Green Arrow, Robin, and the entirety of Gotham City's power grid to have a fistfight so brutal that he ended up giving himself a heart attack. Their arguments aren't limited to non-canonical alternate futures either. Take a look at Hush, which is essentially Batman's greatest hits wrapped around one of comics' most ludicrously convoluted mysteries. We see Superman's mind taken over by Poison Ivy, which leads Batman to put on a kryptonite ring and uppercut Superman back into his right mind. It's worth noting that both of those fights involved Superman holding back. But hey, a victory with an asterisk is still a victory. Green Lantern. Then we have the highly controversial all-star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder. It's so controversial that you're probably familiar with it even if you don't read comics. Batman cutting at Dick Grayson in the Batmobile, Wonder Woman calling a random pedestrian a sperm bank, Batman and Black Canary getting turned on by ultra-violence. It all happens in this one story, and you can trust us. Context doesn't really make it better. Batman's scene with Green Lantern, however, is one of those rare moments where something is so ridiculous that it loops back around to being amazing. In order to face Hal Jordan, whose Green Lantern ring can't affect anything yellow, Batman lures him into a room where he has painted literally everything yellow. The furniture, his costume, he's even spray painted his own face, and to top it all off, he even taunts and sneers at Green Lantern while sipping on a refreshing glass of lemonade, until he finally baits him into a physical confrontation. Of course, it's actually Robin who does the fighting, but considering that Batman's the one who orchestrated the entire situation so that a grown-ass superhero could get his throat crushed by a 10-year-old slathered in spray paint, it's fair to say the win belongs to him. Guy Gardner. Batman's lantern problems are nothing new. Coming at you from 1987's Justice League number 5, Batman landed the single most famous hero versus hero punch in the history of the DC universe, and possibly all of comic history. On one side, you have Guy Gardner, the bowl-cut Green Lantern commonly known as the biggest jerk in the DC universe, constantly running his mouth about how he should be running the team. On the other side, we have Batman. At this point, you probably know what happens next. The conflict builds for a few issues until finally, Guy rears back to take a swing and Batman drops him with a single punch directly to the nose, knocking him out cold. Guy is hit so hard that the punch crossed realities into the Brave and the Bold animated series.
You so much as sneeze without my permission, you're going to regret it.
That I'd like to see! One punch! One punch!
And the best part, Guy remains unconscious on the floor of the Justice League's kitchen until halfway through the next issue, while the rest of the team goes on a mission, then knocks himself back out by hitting his head on the underside of a counter as soon as he wakes up. In other words, Batman punched him so hard it knocked him out twice. Wildcat. It's a tale as old as time. Boxing champ Ted Grant was inspired by a Green Lantern comic book and decided to dress up as a 6-foot kitty cat and punch criminals until crime wasn't a thing anymore. Listen, it was 1941. Nobody really knew what they were doing back then. Wildcat has traditionally been shown as one of the fighters that trained Bruce Wayne in the art of combat during his teenage years. But in Brave and the Bold, the Joker was able to force them to fight each other. How? By threatening to shoot a puppy. Ultimately, they knocked each other out at the same time. Listen, it was 1975. They definitely knew what they were doing. But that doesn't mean they didn't get weird with it. And if it's good enough for National Lampoon, it's good enough for the Joker. Punisher. While they're both on the same side in the broadest way possible, the Punisher's tendency to leave his opponents as bullet-riddled corpses clashes with Batman's time-tested code against killing, and that comes to a head when Batman stops the Punisher from killing the Joker during Punisher/Batman Deadly Nights. Before Batman can explain that this is probably why the Punisher doesn't have a lot of recurring villains, Frank Castle decks him with a hard right, and Batman in classic fashion tells him he let him have one punch because he knows he's frustrated. When Punisher takes a second swing, however, Batman doesn't just catch his fist, he casually throws him face first into a wall with a blunt "I said one." Captain America. Batman vs. Captain America is one of the most perfect matchups you could ask for. The only problem is settling on a winner, and while the odds would tend to favor the super soldier over the world's greatest detective, that's not always how it works out. In 1996's DC vs. Marvel, the decision was left up to a vote by the fans. The result was a brawl that took place in a sewer, in which the heroes fought each other to a standstill, until a sudden rush of water swamped Cap and gave Batman the chance to bop him over the head with a batarang. It's not exactly the most dignified ending to a fight, but hey, a victory with a technicality is still a victory. Interestingly enough, when the two characters squared off again for 2003's JLA/Avengers, Batman conceded that while Captain America could beat him in a straight-up fight, nobody had time for all that.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Which, when you think about it, is a pretty great way to weasel your way out of a rematch. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The weirdest thing about the Batman/Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles crossover is that it somehow didn't happen in 1990. It wasn't until 2015 that they actually met up, but when they did, it was pretty much everything you wanted to see. Dimension-hopping adventure, Shredder pitted against Ra's al Ghul, and Mr. Freeze transformed into a mutant polar bear, which is pretty amazing. And of course, it also gives you a hero versus hero fight. Just to start things off, and unlike most of these, this one actually makes a lot of sense. If you're Batman and you see a bunch of 5-foot turtles with ninja weapons running around town, everything that's happened over the past 75 years is going to lead you to the conclusion that they're probably up to no good. Batman not only takes out each of the 4 Ninja Turtles in turn, and fights Splinter to a draw before the Turtles have to retreat, he also takes their weapons, and uses Raphael's sai to shatter Leonardo's katana. In the end, the Turtles pretty much become Batman's biggest fans.
Give me the camera. Oh, look, he's doing his Batman voice.
Hulk. It's the most improbable victory of all time, and it happened in 1981's Batman vs. the Incredible Hulk. For the most part, it's a pretty fantastic fight, putting Batman on the defensive against Hulk's unstoppable physical force. It even includes awesome moments like Batman busting out a Jackie Chan-style dodge by leaping straight through the open windows of a Hulk-hurled car as it smashes against a wall. The end of their first encounter, though, has one of the biggest bits of belief stretching since Captain America was swamped by sewer water. After realizing that punching isn't going to get anywhere, Batman simply drops some knockout gas, and then delivers a kick to the solar plexus so hard that the Hulk is forced to take a deep inhale of that sweet, sleepy cloud. Hulk hits the floor, and Batman celebrates a victory that probably never should have happened.
Batman is often treated like a god among mortal superheroes by dedicated comic fans. After all, he's basically a genius ninja detective billionaire with enough money to build weapons designed to beat the most powerful heroes and villains in the DC universe. Still, comics writers like to remind readers that Batman is totally capable of having his bat butt kicked up and down the streets of Gotham. Even though he always bounces back, let's take a look at some of the heroes and villains that have destroyed Batman. Bane. Let's start with the obvious one, the big bad guy that beat Batman so badly it made the evening news. In the summer of 1993, DC kicked off a major Batman event called Nightfall, in which Batman becomes burnt out after Bane releases all of his greatest villains from Arkham Asylum at once. While Bats is overworked and overstressed, Bane discovers that the Dark Knight is Bruce Wayne, which leads to a violent showdown in the Batcave. Things don't go well for Batman. Bane dominates the fight against a weakened Caped Crusader. He lifts Batman over his head and brings him crashing down over his knee, breaking Batman's back and putting him completely out of commission. It's become such an iconic takedown that it made its way to the big screen in The Dark Knight Rises.
Oh, your money!
It really is the most devastating hit that Batman has ever taken, but it's not the only one. Superman. Even within the ridiculous medium of comics where anything is possible, it takes a lot to believe Batman has a realistic shot at defeating Superman in a one-on-one fight. But somehow, Batman often seems to come out on top. Often, but not always. There was the time villain Maxwell Lord made Superman hallucinate that he was battling Darkseid in a gladiatorial arena, when in reality he was beating on Batman so badly that Bruce ended up in a coma. In the story Lex Luthor, Man of Steel, Batman is planning to attack Superman with kryptonite, only to have Supes literally blow the rock out of Batman's hand, then pound Batman to within an inch of his life again. Or how about the time an alien parasite called Black Rock took over Batman's body, granting him superhuman strength, flight, and a whole lot of crazy. Even fighting a Batman with superpowers, Superman was able to punch the parasite right out of his body. By the way, punching is typically not a good solution for dealing with parasites. Wonder Woman. In the 2016 graphic novel Wonder Woman, The Hikatea, Batman is on the hunt for a woman responsible for the deaths of sex slavers and drug dealers in Gotham. And she just so happens to be the very same person Wonder Woman has been honor-bound to protect. When the two titans of the DC Universe collide, things get ugly, mostly for Batman. Diana beats him into submission and stands with a foot on his head. If that isn't the ultimate symbol of Batman getting owned, we don't know what is. He escapes by invoking an Amazonian ritual, but it's a pretty close call. Prometheus. Though he's a villain you don't hear much about,
Oh no! Prometheus!
Prometheus is Batman's twisted mirror image, and in an even more literal way than Joker or Two-Face. Batman's family was gunned down by a street thug, but Prometheus's parents were criminals killed by the police, leading him to swear vengeance upon those who attempt to bring justice to the world. Like Batman, he's a trained fighter, he's filthy rich, and he's got a sharp mind. But despite sharing the same name, he has very little to do with the Prometheus who makes an appearance in the Arrowverse. Prometheus masquerades as the hero Retro and walks straight into the Justice League's watchtower with a helmet that grants him the skills of the 30 greatest martial artists in the world, including Batman. He then beats the snot out of everyone, and his trouncing of the Justice League only ends when Catwoman whips him in the nethers. Deacon Blackfire. The Cult is one of the darkest, most brutal stories in the Batman canon, thanks to the vicious Deacon Blackfire, leader of a cult of Gotham's homeless who have been brainwashed into doing his murderous bidding. During his investigation into the cult, Batman is captured by Deacon's forces and spends a huge chunk of the tale being tortured and kissed gently on the cheek while high on psychotropic drugs. It's all an attempt to brainwash Batman into fighting for Blackfire's underground army. Batman's eventually saved by Robin, but not before being reduced to a sobbing husk of his former self and having his entire worldview shattered. The best part? Robin finally gets Batman back for all those meme-friendly slaps to the face. Blackfire isn't even the only opponent to use drugs to take down Batman either. Swamp Thing. You might think that Swamp Thing is a joke, and if you've ever heard his old cartoon theme song, you wouldn't be wrong.
Swamp Thing! You are amazing!
Bad cartoons aside, Swamp Thing isn't just one of the most fascinating characters in all of the DC comics, he's also one of the most powerful. In fact, he's won pretty much every fight he and Batman have gotten into. When Batman chases Killer Croc into Swamp Thing's, swamp, the big green guy takes out bats with a puff of hallucinogenic pollen. The most memorable beatdown happened in Swamp Thing number 53, when the Muckman's wife is in police custody and he responds by turning Gotham into a jungle. When Batman confronts him, Swampy divides himself into many Swamp Things and just beats the snot out of Batman like it's a gang initiation ritual. Poor Batman never had a bat chance. Deathstroke. Slade Wilson is one of the deadliest characters in any comic book universe, regardless of the publisher. He was the world's greatest killer even before the government experimented on him, making him even deadlier. One of his first fights after getting his own comic book in the early 90s was with Batman. At this point, the Dark Knight was already something of a legend, able to defeat any foe that crossed his path. So it was kind of a big deal when Deathstroke and Batman threw down in an old-school fistfight, and Deathstroke beat him into unconsciousness by tossing him into a bookshelf. The only reason Batman is alive today is because Deathstroke spared him, and they ended up hanging around together for a couple of issues afterwards. Lady Shiva. The assassin known as Lady Shiva is one of the greatest martial artists in the world, according to Batman himself. When she's not an ally of Batman, she's kicking his butt. Like in the pages of Nightwing number 0, when Shiva did battle with both Batman and Dick Grayson at the same time. She downed Batman with a poison-tipped shuriken, then beat up Dick until she felt sorry for him and offered to train him. He declined, but it was Lady Shiva's influence that convinced Dick Grayson to stop being Robin and become his own man. It was then that he decided to become Nightwing. Not too many career decisions come from watching someone beat up your dad, but hey, Comic books are weird. Joker. Crushing Batman psychologically and pushing him to the edge of his own sanity is the Joker's primary objective, and the list of Joker's offenses is disturbing and endless. But the only time that the Joker has been able to completely destroy Batman was when he stole the awesome power of an interdimensional imp. Using the abilities of Superman antagonist Mr. Mixie Spitlick, Joker warps reality to kill Batman over and over, until Superman makes him realize that even though Joker is all-powerful, he just can't bear to let go of Batman.
No, you complete me.
Darkseid. It's not surprising that someone like Darkseid, who's basically a god, can take out a flesh-and-blood mortal like Batman. What was surprising, however, was just how Darkseid did it. During the Final Crisis storyline, it looked like Darkseid simply fried Batman to a crisp with his weird eye lasers. Of course, no one really ever stays dead in comic books for long. As it happened, Darkseid replaced Batman's body with a dead clone, fooling Superman and most of his super friends, and sent the real Batman traveling uncontrollably through time. Why would he bother with all of that? Because Batman was turned into a weapon, whose forced time travel adventures threatened to undo all of reality. Eventually, Batman, with a lot of help from the Justice League, managed to escape back to the present day without destroying all of existence. Still, the important thing to keep in mind is that he got his butt kicked, and all it took was a single glance.
Holy spontaneous combustion!
Christopher Nolan's epic Batman series ended on a somewhat confusing note. Batman was essentially dead, Bruce Wayne retired in Italy, and all the villains met a slow, dramatic end. But every resolution seemed to bring yet another cliffhanger. So what exactly happened with the finale of The Dark Knight Rises? Here's an explanation of what really went down in the ending of Nolan's Batman series, and what it meant and still could mean for the future. Last Survivor. During the climax of the movie, Batman scoops up the bomb threatening Gotham with his Batpod, and shoots off toward the ocean as fast as he can, where it eventually explodes at a safe distance from the city. The now dead Batman is finally hailed as the hometown hero he was all along, and Alfred heads to Florence, likely holding on to a sliver of hope that he'll find Bruce Wayne living a new life as a quiet family man, just as he'd described at the beginning of the film. Of course, Alfred does spot Bruce lunching with Selina Kyle in a pitch-perfect resolution that, well, seems almost too good to be true. And for many viewers, it was. Some fans interpreted this as another instance of Christopher Nolan spinning top-style trickery. They saw the scene of Wayne's perfect retirement as a part of Alfred's imagination. But Christian Bale says what we saw was what we got.
My personal opinion is, no, it was not a dream. That was for real.
The fact that Lucius Fox later discovers that the autopilot function on the Bat had been restored by Bruce himself certainly lent some credence to Alfred's vision too. The Light Knight Rises. If Batman was the Dark Knight, then Officer John Blake as the franchise's Robin is certainly a lighter shade of justice.
You should use your full name. I like that name. Robin. Thanks.
The orphan boy turned honest cop was a champion of kids in need, and helped reconnect Wayne Enterprises with the orphanage he'd grown up in. He's also the perfect person to take over and become the city's newest masked hero in Batman's stead. A future that was heavily hinted at when he found the Batcave at the end of the film. We don't get to see what his crime-fighting style might be like, but based on his do-gooder attitude throughout the collapse of the city, Blake could be an optimistic successor to Wayne's tenure as Gotham's resident hero. So the movie's closing moments, where Blake gets the key to the cave, asks the obvious question: room for a sequel? It's been several years since The Dark Knight Rises closed out Nolan's Batman trilogy, but the ending to the film definitely left the door open to more exploration of his grim vision of Gotham City. With Blake taking over the Batcave and plenty of villains from the comics waiting for their turn on screen, there's a ton of material to make this film series a quadrilogy or even larger. Unfortunately, the would-be star of such a sequel, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, has cast doubt on the idea of Nolan's series ever getting a fourth installment. He told CinemaBlend, "I think Nolan very much thought of that movie as a conclusion, and there's a theme that runs through all three of these movies that begins in the first movie, runs through the second movie, and it concludes in that moment where he says that Batman is more than a man. Batman is a symbol." And so to have another man other than Bruce Wayne kind of becoming Batman at the end of that trilogy, I think that's the perfect ending to that story. But still, even if Nolan and Gordon Levitt aren't interested in returning to the material, another filmmaker could, in theory, pick up where Nolan's series left off somewhere down the line. After all, Bryan Singer's Superman Returns was a sequel to Superman 2, 26 years later, and Singer straight up ignored Superman 3 and 4, so never say never. Setting a tone. Before The Dark Knight, the campiness of 1997's Batman and Robin derailed the Caped Crusader's movie bankability.
I freeze. I'm Batman.
But the end of Nolan's series signified a major tonal shift, giving us a much more serious and dramatic style than the previous set of Batman films.
I'm Batman.
That new, more grounded view of DC's comic book characters would become something of an inadvertent standard for the DC Expanded Universe films to follow. Just look at Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice's grim, gritty version of Batman. The same dark tone colored the palettes of Henry Cavill's Superman, and Justice League looks like it's heading in the same direction. And that's not the only precedent Nolan's film set for the Batworld either. The standalone series. Everyone knows that shared comic book universes are all the rage right now. After all, there's a lot of money to be made by dangling one piece of the shared universe as a must-see for the eventual superhero smash film that's coming soon from each studio. Even Harry Potter has gotten in on the sequel, prequel, spin-off game. But the Dark Knight film proves that an endless extension of a beloved property isn't always necessary to rake in the big bucks and earn respect at the same time. While sequel hopes might always loom over Nolan's trilogy, it currently stands alone as its own three-part series that earned a lot of respect from critics and had audiences forking over their cash at the same time. It's hard to imagine what might have become of the series if Nolan had allowed Warner Brothers to spin the franchise out into a shared universe of its own. But the fact is that he didn't, and his movies still accomplished everything they meant to. Hopefully, future filmmakers will look back at his trilogy and its standalone ending as the perfect way to handle high-profile properties for the next generation.
Holy refreshing sense of humility, Batman!
It sounds like Christian Bale really did know when to say goodbye to his role as a Dark Knight. Bale has been hot on the publicity trail of late in support of his new race car drama, Ford v Ferrari, in which he plays a racer opposite Matt Damon's mild-mannered car designer. Recently, the Ford v Ferrari press campaign found the former Batman actor sitting down with the folks at the Toronto Sun, who used part of their time with him to ask a question that's long been on the minds of fans devoted to Bale's iconic work in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. The question, of course, was this: why didn't Bale sign on for a Dark Knight 4? Bale's answer to the question is as simple as it is surprisingly humble. The actor claimed he ultimately decided a fourth turn as the Caped Crusader would have been, quote, overindulgent. That's right, in a time where stars and studios seem to keep lining up blockbuster sequels to milk every single penny out of a franchise, Bale, long regarded as a true actor's actor, apparently told Warner Brothers thanks but no thanks when the studio approached him about reprising his role as Bruce Wayne for another Dark Knight venture. And if Bale is to be believed, he did so largely because he didn't want to overstay his welcome in the role.
More copycats last night, Alfred, with guns.
Why don't you hide them and take the weekend off?
That wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I said I wanted to inspire people.
It's worth noting that Bale's decision was also greatly influenced by the fact that Nolan was indeed moving on from the Dark Knight franchise. As Bale continued to wax poetic about why he didn't return for a fourth Dark Knight flick, he admitted as much, noting that, outside of his own wishes to leave Batman behind, his decision to walk away from what would have no doubt been a mammoth payday for Dark Knight 4 was equally out of respect for Christopher Nolan himself. Bale explained, "We were never arrogant to assume that we had an opportunity beyond one film at a time. That's something that Chris always would talk about. He'd say, 'This is it. We're making one film. That's all we've got.' Then when they came and said, 'You want to go make another?' It was fantastic, but we still said, 'This is it. We will not get another opportunity.'" Bale went on to offer that while the trilogy was far from a given for Nolan's Dark Knight saga, it was, if only indirectly, what the director had in mind from the start. The actor shared, "Chris had always said to me that if we were fortunate to be able to make 3, we would stop. Let's walk away after that. Then when they, Warner Brothers, inevitably came to us and said, 'How about a number 4?' I said, 'No, we have to stick to Chris's dream,' which was always to, hopefully, do a trilogy. Let's not stretch too far and become overindulgent and go for a fourth." As we all know, Bale and Nolan got 2 more chapters of their Gotham set saga after the success of 2005's Batman Begins, with 2008's game-changing The Dark Knight and 2011's trilogy capping The Dark Dark Knight Rises, they also happen to fashion one of the most celebrated superhero trilogies in the history of cinema.
Batman first hit the silver screen in 1943, and in the decade since, he's been one of Hollywood's most accomplished heroes. In a dozen feature films, we've seen a truly incredible roster of Caped Crusaders and Dark Knights taking the character in plenty of different directions. As prominent as he's been in film though, not all Batmen are created equal. Here's our ranking of every movie Batman from worst to best. Batman, 1943. The thing you really have to understand about the original Batman serial is that it's bad, even by the standards of the time. With 15 parts, it's 3.5 hours of the worst version of Batman to ever hit the silver screen. Batman and Robin, played by Lewis Wilson and Douglas Croft, are recast here as government agents tasked with stopping the villainous Dr. Darker from building a death ray and creating an army of zombies.
I've converted him into a zombie. He can only act as I direct.
That might sound exciting, but it's atrocious and repetitive with awful special effects, hilariously awkward costumes, unconvincing fights, and, let's not forget, America was at war with Japan at the time, so they played up the Japanese bad guy as you'd expect. This Batman is definitely best left forgotten. Batman and Robin, 1949. The only good thing you can say about the second Batman serial is that it's not as offensive as its predecessor. It's still bad though. The bumbling, barely present Batman is trapped in an awful plot that stretches out even longer than the first serial, with Robert Lowery's Batman stumbling from one goofy cliffhanger to the next in an attempt to unmask a mad scientist called the Wizard. After 4 hours, surprise, he turns out to be exactly the guy you thought he was the whole time. The worst part though is the costume. A straight up sweatsuit capped off with an ill-fitting cowl that makes him look more like floppy-eared Bunny Rabbit Man. Batman Forever, 1995. In a movie that's soaked in lime green neon and hot pink leopard print, Val Kilmer's portrayal of the Caped Crusader is, well, the kindest way to put it would be reserved. Kilmer, only 2 years removed from a charismatic, scene-stealing turn as Doc Holliday in Tombstone, drifts through Batman Forever with the scene presence of a cardboard cutout. To be fair, there was a good reason for Kilmer to make that choice. Director Joel Schumacher was clearly drawing his inspiration from the 1966 television show, and with Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones chewing their way through every available bit of scenery, replicating Adam West's stentorian straight man probably seemed like the best way to go.
Fully interactive holographs. Only a high-frequency carrier wave beamed directly into the brain could create such images.
There are parts where it works, but when it comes to actually being Batman, his Adam West impression just doesn't land. It's especially rough in his tepid romance with Nicole Kidman as Dr. Chase Meridian, the worst named love interest in the franchise.
And what a grand pursuit you must be.
Batman and Robin, 1997. To say Batman and Robin has a bad reputation is putting it lightly. It's commonly regarded as one of the worst superhero movies of all time, with a bloated cast of villains and sidekicks sprawling out into a plot that starts off silly and ends up full-on ludicrous. It's so bad that both Joel Schumacher and George Clooney have apologized for it, and it was credited with nearly killing the franchise until it returned with a darker direction under Christopher Nolan.
All right, everyone. Chill.
But as controversial as it might sound, Clooney himself is not actually that bad. His effortless charm doesn't really work for Batman, but it actually does work pretty well for Bruce Wayne. If you can get past the toy-friendly suits and their marble statue anatomy, Clooney's best work comes when he's out of the costume, sweeping around Wayne Manor and dealing with Alfred's not quite fatal illness. Plus, let's be real here. Even if Clooney was as bad as the movie's reputation would lead you to believe, he'd still score bonus points for the way he refers to Dick Grayson when he gets mad.
She's infected us with some sort of pheromone extract.
Oh, is that what it is, Bruce? I'm under some kind of magic spell?
She wants to kill you, Dick.
Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Justice League 2016 to 2017. Much of director Zack Snyder's inspiration for Batman v Superman came from Frank Miller's landmark comic story The Dark Knight Returns. Unfortunately, while the movie definitely lifted entire scenes wholesale from the comics in an effort to please hardcore fans, they're all separated from the original context. Ben Affleck's Batman is a ludicrously violent murderer who is easily manipulated into a fistfight with another superhero, which ends when the person he's fighting reminds him that other people also have mums.
Why did you say that name?
It's his mother's name!
Despite the movie's silly plot coincidences, Affleck's Batman has some noteworthy fight sequences, even if by this point the character apparently gave up trying to uphold his no-kill rule. The Lego Batman Movie, 2017. The Lego version of Batman is the rarest kind of satire, a parody of something that actually does a great job at being the thing that it's parodying. Will Arnett voices Batman as a full-on comedy character. He's got an obsession with darkness, and Arnett ramps up his naturally gravelly voice into a spoof of Christian Bale's. At the same time, though, he's very rarely presented as anything other than extremely good at what he does, an ultra-competent superhero who really does act heroically, most of the time. Either way, it works. While other portrayals might do their best to move away from the inherent silliness of a guy dressed as a bat who primarily fights murder clowns, embracing it gives the Lego version a flavor that helps him rival even the best of his big screen contemporaries. As funny as he might be, he's still Batman, in one of his purest forms. The Dark Knight Trilogy, 2005 to 2012. There's a moment in Batman Begins where a crooked cop gets snared by the ankle and hauled up 5 stories in the middle of a thunderstorm so that a vigilante who looks like Satan himself can scream in his face.
I don't know. I swear to God. Swear to me!
So yeah, when you're describing Christian Bale's performance, the word you want is intense. Bale's Batman brings that level of intensity to everything he does, showing an emotional range that stretches from the righteous fury of Batman to the aimless pain of the orphan Bruce Wayne who is denied his vengeance, and even the quippy sarcasm of his exchanges with Alfred. It's a powerful portrayal that's only ever matched when he goes up against Heath Ledger's Joker, one of the best performances in the genre. Batman/Batman Returns, 1989 to 1992. Here's the thing about Tim Burton's Batman movies. They're great Tim Burton movies. They have an incredible visual style, especially when it comes to Gotham City. It's a hellish industrial urban sprawl slammed against retro Art Deco, where everyone still dresses like it's 1940 and where purple knockout gas is a deadly threat against a monochromatic cityscape. They're full of great bits of satire, beautiful cinematography, and the casting is amazingly offbeat, pitting our hero against Jack Nicholson, Michelle Pfeiffer, Jack Palance, and Christopher Walken. The problem is that DC and Warner Brothers were still trying to figure out what Batman and Bruce Wayne should be like in the modern era. The result was some awkward exchanges between Bruce Wayne and Vicky Vale, as we see Batman's human side struggle. No one really captures that disconnect more than Michael Keaton did when he put on the cape and cowl. He's actually kind of perfect for the kind of remote, mysterious weirdo who sleeps upside down because he wants to be more like a bat.
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
But there's a difference between the stylized goofiness that Burton explored in movies like Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Beetlejuice, and the 80s action movie aesthetic that saw Keaton's Batman blowing up buildings full of criminals. Batman's actions are mostly portrayed as a personal quest for vengeance that only incidentally winds up saving a city, and that's a shame. Bruce Wayne's borderline psycho exchanges aside, Michael Keaton ultimately nails the dark, almost spectral version of Batman that terrifies most of Gotham's criminals.
I want you to tell all your friends about me.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Batman, the movie, 1966. The best thing about Adam West's performance in Batman 66 is that it can mean completely different things depending when you watch it. As a child, it's easy to buy West's Batman as completely genuine, and as an adult, once you're in on the joke, the fact that he was able to play the perfect straight man for a wild cast of villains is every bit as astonishing as those surface-level comic book thrills. The movie released on the big screen in 1966, between the first 2 seasons of the show, has everything in a literal sense. The arch-villains this time around are 4 of his greatest foes brought together as the United Underworld, revealed with a sequence in which Batman and Robin identified their enemies through profound leaps of logic.
You mean where there's a fish there could be a penguin? But wait! It happened at sea. See? Sea for Catwoman!
At the same time, it's easy to forget that West is actually really good as Batman, particularly when he goes to save his love interest, Miss Kitka. The lengths he's willing to go, and the heartbreak in his eyes when he discovers that she was Catwoman all along. Even if you're watching it with a healthy level of irony, it's a powerful moment. No actor has ever been as strongly identified with the role of Batman as Adam West, and this movie shows exactly why. His performance walks a delicate balance between full-hearted adventure and witty satire, and the end result is perfect. He is, and always will be, the Batman who won't even risk hurting a bunch of baby ducks.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Batman, Mask of the Phantasm, 1993. Okay, we'll admit that this one is a bit of a cheat. Kevin Conroy has, after all, been the most prominent Batman actor for more than 25 years, making his debut on Batman, the animated series, and staying in the role all the way through the Arkham video games. But there's a good reason for that. Conroy is an amazing Batman, and everything that makes him great is on display in Mask of the Phantasm. The film is the first time that the animated series really dug into Batman's origin story, and Conroy's performance sold it beautifully. The scene when he's pleading with his parents' graves, telling them he doesn't want to fight crime because he's finally found happiness, is devastatingly emotional.
I know I made a promise, but I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy.
Even better is when that happiness is taken away and Bruce gives himself over to his mission entirely. For a generation of Batman fans, Conroy's is the voice they hear in their heads when they read comics, and that alone should show just how great he was in the role. It takes an incredible amount of talent to redefine the character, but that's exactly what Kevin Conroy did in a way that no other Batman could. The Caped Crusader's ongoing film saga ranks among the top 5 highest-grossing movie franchises in the United States, but he's also faced his share of setbacks along the way. For every Bat blockbuster that made its way to theaters, there's a take on the character that's unceremoniously died in development. Here's the history of every one of those cancelled Batman movies. The Batman. Getting Tim Burton's 1989 Batman onto the big screen was a difficult process. 10 years before Michael Keaton made his Dark Knight debut, producers Benjamin Melniker and Michael Uslan acquired the film rights to Batman so they could adapt the character in the same vein as Superman. They wanted to have a definitive, dark version of Batman on film, and producers John Peters and Peter Guber agreed when they aborted the project in November 1979. 4 years later, the script by James Bond and Superman screenplay co-writer Tom Mankiewicz, simply titled The Batman, was completed, focusing on Batman and Robin's origins, with the Joker as the central villain. While the Batman/007 version of Batman would have been awesome, the project went through multiple developers and producers, losing bits and pieces along the way. In the end, the studio hired Tim Burton to direct, who felt the treatment was too similar to Superman and would be a better fit for a TV series. He changed virtually every aspect of the movie, so while they didn't get everything they wanted, the producers still got their darker version of Batman on the silver screen. It just took a decade to make it happen. Robin's spin-off. When Chris O'Donnell joined the franchise as Robin for 1995's Batman Forever, he seemed poised for a long run as the character. He returned for 1997's Batman and Robin and planned to reprise his role in a possible 5th film, but that never came to fruition. Warner Brothers also briefly pursued a Robin spin-off, which O'Donnell confirmed as recently as 2012. As he told Access Hollywood, they were going to do a Robin movie back in the day, then Batman and Robin was such a bomb, they were like, scrap that, That was the end of that. Batman Unchained. Joel Schumacher told Variety that he'd always planned to make 3 Batman movies, but unfortunately for everyone involved in Schumacher's Bat saga, Batman and Robin tanked, sending the franchise into years of development hell, and leaving that 3rd movie unrealized. The problems weren't just at the box office, however. Akiva Goldsman, who wrote the screenplays for Schumacher's first 2 Bat flicks, opted not to return for the next installment. I Am Legend screenwriter Mark Protesevich took Goldman's place and came up with the name Batman Unchained, which focused on Scarecrow as the central villain. Schumacher wanted Nicolas Cage to play the fear-inducing bad guy, saying that he owed the world, quote, a real Batman movie. But Batman and Robin crashed and burned, taking Batman Unchained with it. Changing course completely, Warner Brothers started looking into the idea of making a Batman Beyond or Batman Year One film instead. Batman Dark Knight. Writers Lee Shapiro and Stephen Wise had an idea for a full Bat reboot. This time, instead of Batman and Robin in their primes, the duo wanted to see Batman retired with Dick Grayson attending college. In the proposed film, Dr. Jonathan Crane, better known as the Scarecrow, still played a prominent role as a professor of psychology at Gotham University. Also appearing, Dr. Kirk Langstrom, who turns into the monstrous Man-Bat. The 2 doctors get into a confrontation and Crane accidentally initiates Kirk's transformation into his bat-like form after seeing Man-Bat terrorize Gotham and that the city's residents are mistaking him for the real Batman. The Dark Knight comes out of retirement to clear his name. The darker idea was pitched to the studio, but after being passed through multiple levels of approval and a few confirmations from producers, the studio's director of development passed on the movie. Batman Year One. Schumacher still wanted to give Batman fans a proper Caped Crusader, and his planned adaptation of Frank Miller's Batman Year One might have fulfilled that goal. Ultimately, the studio parted ways with Schumacher and went with Requiem for a Dream director Darren Aronofsky instead. After hiring Aronofsky, the studio bolstered the project's pedigree further by bringing Frank Miller himself on board to script. In an interview with IGN, Aronofsky urged fans to, quote, toss out everything you can imagine about Batman. Everything. We're starting completely anew. Unfortunately, the studio didn't get into Miller's version of the script, so they hired the Wachowskis of Matrix fame to write a treatment. Again, the studio wasn't satisfied, so they turned to Joss Whedon, whose take also didn't pass muster with the studio. They finally ended up shelving the idea altogether in 2002. Batman Beyond. Warner Brothers also floated the idea of making a Batman Beyond film inspired by the hit animated show which had debuted in 1999. Bruce Timm and Paul Dini's series featured Terry McGinnis, a teenager who takes over the mantle of Batman under the guidance of a retired Bruce Wayne. The studio's movie division liked Batman Beyond so much that they wanted to make a live-action version for the big screen. They hired Remember the Titans director Boaz Yakin to helm the project, with Dini writing the script. Sources told Variety in 2000 that a Batman Beyond film didn't interfere with Warner Brothers' plans to continue with a 5th Batman movie, but that changed quickly. By August 2001, Dini said that the studio had shelved the live-action adaptation. What's more, later that year, the Batman Beyond animated series was cancelled. Batman vs. Superman Asylum. Long before Zack Snyder's Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice hit the big screens, Warner Brothers previously had plans to pit the DC Universe's 2 biggest heroes against each other. Andrew Kevin Walker, who penned the incredibly dark Seven, pitched an idea that involved Batman coming out of retirement shortly after his wife's death to join a recently divorced Superman. Until, of course, they're duped by Lex Luthor into fighting each other. Sound familiar? Akiva Goldsman, returning to the franchise once more, revised Walker's script in 2002, which was enough to convince Warner Brothers to move forward with the project. At least for a little while. Wolfgang Peterson, director of Air Force One and The Never-Ending Story, intended to direct the film in 2003, but the project was derailed when J.J. Abrams jumped into the fray with a script for a movie called Superman Flyby, which included a very different version of the Man of Steel. According to Peterson, the studio decided to try separate versions of Superman and Batman, instead resulting in Superman Returns and Batman Begins. Justice League Mortal. 2017's Justice League wasn't the first attempt to bring Batman and the rest of the League to the big screen. In 2009, the first plan to bring DC's heroes together came awfully close to hitting theaters. Written by Kieran and Michelle Mulroney, Justice League Mortal was to be helmed by Mad Max director George Miller. Its cast included DJ Catrona as Superman, Armie Hammer as Batman, Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, Adam Brody as The Flash, Common as Green Lantern, and Teresa Palmer as Talia al Ghul, with Jay Baruchel playing the villain Maxwell Lord. Cameras were ready to roll, but the writer's strike of the late 2000s put a damper on the movie. The overwhelming success of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight convinced Warner Brothers that a Justice League with a different Batman simply wouldn't work. Justice League Mortal is the Justice League movie that never was. So, when you're watching Ben Affleck throw down with Khal Drogo, just think about how much crazier it would have been if the director of Mad Max had gotten to the League first.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Unless you spent the last 80 years living in a Batcave, you probably already know a whole lot about Batman. His origins, his fancy gadgets, and his penchant for young sidekicks. What you might not know is that an insane series of events drove Batman to being the dark, brooding vigilante that he is today. Here are some of the craziest moments in Batman's history. Zur-En-Arrh. In the mid-1950s, Batman began to have interdimensional and outer space adventures, instead of just fighting street-level thugs and weirdos. So in Batman 113, our hero makes a strange trip to visit a tattered, multicolored Batman from planet Zur-En-Arrh, who needs Earth's Batman's help fighting an alien invasion, though Batman really should have just arrested Zur-En-Arrh for his crimes against fashion.
You just booked your next vacation, Rotul. A luxurious stay on the Zeta Alpha 9 prison planet.
If this wasn't strange enough, modern Batman writer Grant Morrison included the formerly forgotten insane adventure from Batman's zany comics history into being some kind of trip into Bruce Wayne's personal imagination land. Apparently, Batman himself created Zur-En-Arrh Batman as a backup personality in case he ever went insane, because people can be backed up like hard drives, apparently. Batmite. The following year, in Detective Comics number 267, Batman is visited from the fifth dimension by an all-powerful imp named Batmite, who absolutely worships the Dark Knight.
After all, I'm your #1 fan.
My fan?
The biggest.
Batmite sets up increasingly strange challenges so he can see his hero in action, including making an enormous statue of Batman himself come to life. Naturally, Batman is annoyed by having another little punk hanging around the Batcave, but the guy persists on and off for the rest of Batman's career.
What is it?
Bat-Baby. Batman endures dozens of unusual transformations during the Silver Age, including periods of getting super old, turning into an ape and a tiger, and being a genie. However, few changes are so strange as Batman number 147's transformation into a baby. Rather than taking the afternoon off, Batman insists on wearing some suspenders and continuing to fight crime, because if you thought a man dressed as a bat was terrifying, a violent baby is truly the stuff of nightmares. Like, can you punch it in self-defense or what? Zebra Batman. Quick disclaimer, as an Englishman, we say zebra, not zebra. I was asked to record this part saying zebra, so just know that every time I say zebra, I'm dying inside. Thank you for your time. Anyway, Zebra Man. Most cite Batman's period of wearing rainbow-colored outfits as his strangest, but his time as a zebra-patterned crime fighter was even stranger. After going up against Zebra Man, a guy in black and white who can emit rays of magnetic force, Batman and Robin go to investigate the criminal's lab. Because Robin is a Darwin Award waiting to happen, he trips and zaps Batman with the same machine that gave Zebra Man his powers, also giving him a similar suit in the process. As usual, Batman literally punches the stripes off of Zebra Man, and everything returns to normal. Well, relatively normal. Death of Robin. After the Silver Age ended, the once carefree Batman of the 60s became darker. Everything reached a boiling point by 1988's A Death in the Family. The Joker kidnaps Robin's estranged, neglectful mother, beats Robin nearly to death with a crowbar, and sets off a bomb. Readers at home were given the chance to call a DC Comics hotline and let them know if they thought Robin should survive or go off to the Batcave in the sky. And a slight majority of overwhelmingly bitter nerds decided that Robin should bite the big one. Robin dies, and Batman sets out on a darker, grimmer path from which he'll never recover. Thanks, geeks. Killing Joke. Because the Joker is on a mission to destroy everything that Batman loves, he goes on his most malicious and personal crime spree in Bat history. In The Killing Joke, the Clown Prince of Crime shoots Barbara Gordon, also known as Batgirl, and paralyzes her permanently before kidnapping her father, Commissioner Gordon. The Commissioner is kept naked in a cage with circus freaks and forced to look at images of his daughter, naked and in agony from a gunshot wound. Batman's entire world continues to fall apart, and his real insanity begins to show through. Venom. After accidentally letting a little girl drown, Batman starts to use a strength-enhancing drug called Venom, knowing that it's a bad idea, but willing to do anything to prevent another death. After realizing that his addiction is sending him into an irrational rage and doing more harm than good, Batman locks himself in a basement for a month and detoxes by sheer willpower. Because damn, he's Batman. But a recovering Batman is still a sight to behold. Nightfall. 2 years later, a criminal named Bane gets a hold of the same drug that Batman was previously abusing and uses it to enhance himself enough to snap Batman's spine. But only after releasing all of the criminals in Arkham to wear down the Caped Crusader into a state of total exhaustion. Batman remains paralyzed for a while a violent protege of his takes over the Batman name and causes the wrong kind of chaos for Gotham's criminals, totally messing up the Batman brand. Even worse on this guy. Batman wets his pants. If there's a single moment in Batman's history that has no right to exist, including this, it's Kevin Smith's comic tale in which Batman wets his unitar because he stands too close to an explosion. Because Smith lives in a world where adults regularly cannot control their bodily functions, Smith drags the Dark Knight into unforgivable territory. He only makes it worse by openly discussing Batman's bedroom habits and making Catwoman have a temper tantrum once she learns that Bruce is getting married. Bob should have stayed silent on this one. Zapped through time. Batman's time travel adventures from the Silver Age make a comeback when supervillain Darkseid shoots the hero with his Omega beams. Normally these beams erase their victim from existence, but this time they send Batman back to the Stone Age, where he lives as a caveman for a while, before slipping through other eras in which he's a witch hunter, a pirate, a cowboy, and a 1930s detective. When Bruce Wayne eventually stumbles back into present day after his epic journey, the Justice League has to stop his heart to prevent dangerous Omega energy from destroying the world anyhow. He survives, because Batman is the most badass superhero. Since he made his debut in Batman issue 1, the Joker has been the Dark Knight's deadliest arch-nemesis. As the years went on, however, his crimes went beyond thematic robberies and into brutal murders, including clubbing Robin to death with a crowbar. That raises a question that's hard to ignore. Why doesn't Batman just kill him?
Come on, I want you to do it, Come on, hit me. Come on, hit me!
It's pretty clear after all these decades that putting a permanent end to the Joker would solve at least half of Gotham City's problems, which makes it difficult for plenty of readers to suspend their disbelief. If you really want to know the actual definitive answer though, we've got it. You just might not like it. That's because the answer exists entirely in our world, where Batman is a fictional character designed to appear in movies, TV shows, and at least 4 comic books every month, forever. If Batman kills the Joker, we can't have any more Joker stories. He is, in very blunt and realistic terms, too popular to die. And he's been that way since the beginning. From the first day that Jerry Robinson drew him on the page, the contrasts of the smiling murderer and the scowling spooky hero made him Batman's perfect arch-enemy. Even by the dawn of the Silver Age, when Batman became a much brighter, more superheroic character, the Joker remained one of the most prominent villains. All of which is to say that Joker stories sell. They sell a lot, and on top of that, he's an interesting character that creators like to make comics about as much as fans like to read them. Unfortunately, Batman's real-world inability to kill the Joker has to be justified in the story, and that justification has become exponentially more difficult over time. It's very easy to understand why Batman keeps taking the Joker back to Arkham Asylum when he's robbing banks and committing gimmick crimes, even if there's an occasional murder thrown in to keep him scary. After all, no one ever asks why Batman doesn't just drag the Riddler out back and shoot him. By the time we got to the 80s though, as Batman himself was redefined for a new era, the Joker was forced to become every bit as unstoppable just on the other side. This was when he truly became Batman's opposite, and if Batman was going to be the greatest hero in the world, the Joker had to be the absolute worst villain. Before the decade was out, the Joker went from being an occasionally murderous arch-villain to the psychopath who shot and assaulted Barbara Gordon, tortured her father, killed Robin, and tried to murder the entire United Nations. In fact, all that happened in 1 year. By the end of the 90s, the Joker was leaving a body count in the double digits at minimum every time he showed up, and was pretty consistently characterized as an irredeemable monster. When Jason Todd, the former Robin that the Joker crowbarred to death, came back to life in 2005, he raised exactly these questions, forcing Batman to provide an in-story reason for why he can't ever kill his oldest, deadliest enemy. In that story, Batman told Jason that if he ever killed the Joker, he'd be unable to stop himself from killing every other criminal who got in his way. And Jason, like plenty of readers, found that argument to be incredibly frustrating. Can the world's greatest detective really not tell the difference between a guy who turned an entire city into smiling zombies and led a death parade through the streets from, like, Kite Man? Really? When you get right down to it though, Batman's attitude toward killing the Joker actually has an internal logic and consistency. It's not actually about the Joker, it's about Batman himself. While casual fans might attribute Batman's famous code against killing to the interference of the comics code, it actually dates back to 1941, predating the code by 13 years. Either way, it became a fundamental truth about the character, reinforcing the idea that Batman has his roots in reacting to someone taking a life. 2 lives if you want to be technical about it. That's the tragedy that he defines himself in opposition to, and the thing that he's always trying to prevent: death. He's a crime fighter, and while he might fight bank robbers when they're around, the taking of a life is the opposite of who he is. Besides, don't forget that Batman lives in a world where ghosts are 100% real. If you thought the Joker was trouble when he was living, you absolutely do not want to know what happens once he shows up in the afterlife.
After all these years, it's easy to assume we've learned everything there is to know about director Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. But just like Batman himself, these movies are very good at keeping their secrets. Batman and Superman are often presented in stark opposition to one another. One is a dark figure who triumphs through technology and intimidation. The other is a bright hero who triumphs through superpowers and inspiration. With that in mind, it might be surprising to hear that Christopher Nolan's Batman actually owes quite a bit to the Man of Steel. Nolan has said that, like many people, he was blown away by Richard Donner's Superman, the movie, in 1978. Among its many brilliant features, he appreciated that it told the full story of Superman's origin. Nolan contrasted this with Tim Burton's 1989 Batman film, in which the character is fully formed by the time the movie starts, and saw Batman Begins as his chance to do Batman in the style of Superman 78. A movie where he could start with a more recognizable setting grounded in reality with a single extraordinary figure in it and, as the title implies, explore that hero's beginnings. While the shape of the current slate of modern DC films comes from the clash between Batman and Superman, Nolan's masterful trilogy could never have started without the inspiration of the Big Blue Boy Scout.
Well, I certainly hope this little incident hasn't put you off flying, miss. Statistically speaking, of course, it's still the safest way to travel.
One of the most notable aspects of Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy is how much Christian Bale made the character his own. He was, after all, the 7th actor to don the costume for the big screen going all the way back to the 40s. And he knew it was inevitable that he'd be compared to previous Batmen. All of which makes it that much more fascinating that when Bale auditioned for the role of Batman, he did so while wearing Val Kilmer's old Batman suit from Batman Forever. In fact, Nolan made every prospective Batman actor wear the old suit. Why go through all the trouble? According to the director, being Batman on-screen transcended concepts such as chemistry or simple acting ability. Instead, he needed an actor who would be believable and compelling without being overshadowed by the iconic imagery that made Batman who he is. Or, in other words, he really just needed a guy who looked good in the suit. No wonder Bale did so many push-ups. Without a doubt, viewers' first glimpse of Harvey Dent's burned face is appropriately grisly.
I'm sorry.
No. No, you're not.
The amount of damage is horrifying, and it gives us a powerful glimpse of the monster he's become as he dispenses his brand of random, coin-based justice against those who've wronged him. Because of how utterly gross Two-Face ended up looking, it's surprising to hear Christopher Nolan admit that he was originally going to be even more repulsive. In an interview, Nolan characterized the final choice for Two-Face's appearance as one of the ones least likely to disturb fans. Why is that? Call it the uncanny valley effect. According to Nolan, they tried versions that were a little less gory, but they wound up being too realistic and way too disturbing. He made the apt comparison to the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, noting that the way the undead were rendered in those films used a less realistic, more exaggerated style that ultimately made the imagery, quote, more powerful and less repulsive. In The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger gave such a powerful and singular performance as the Joker that it's still difficult to imagine anyone else in the role, even after seeing Joaquin Phoenix's compelling performance in Joker. Nonetheless, even Ledger's performance had its precedents. Much of the Dark Knight trilogy selectively draws from comics lore. And for The Dark Knight, one major element of the Joker's plan is taken from The Killing Joke by comics legend Alan Moore and Brian Bolland.
And here we go.
That comic is infamous for a number of reasons. The Joker paralyzes and assaults Barbara Gordon and kidnaps Commissioner Gordon, taking him to a demented funhouse where he's tortured, with images of what the Joker's done to his daughter. Why do all this? To break Batman's most dedicated ally, proving that everyone is only one disastrously bad day away from becoming as twisted as he is. Sound familiar? It should. In Dark Knight, Ledger's Joker gives two boats, one filled with average citizens and one filled with prisoners with the capacity to blow each other up. He gambles that the so-called regular people will give in to their base impulses and kill dozens of people to save themselves. In both cases, though, he's proven wrong. In the comics, Gordon retains his sanity, and the citizens and prisoners of the movie don't descend into becoming killers. Another comic book series that heavily contributes to The Dark Knight is Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's 1996 miniseries Batman: The Long Halloween, a story that unfolds over the course of a year early in Batman's career. Batman, James Gordon, and a as-yet unscarred Harvey Dent form an alliance to take down Gotham's organized crime. The first issue ends on Halloween night, when Batman and Dent find where the mob's secret cash storage is and burn it all to a crisp. A scene that gets a nod in The Dark Knight when the Joker burns huge stacks of cash in the belly of a ship. By the end of the miniseries, it's clear a new kind of criminal has risen in Gotham to replace the mob. In the final issue, almost all of Batman's more well-known villains unite in a final assault on mob boss Sal Maroni's home. It's Two-Face who eventually kills Maroni, just as he does in The Dark Knight. We hear echoes of this shift from mobster to supervillain in The Dark Knight, particularly during the interrogation scene when Joker talks about how Batman has changed Gotham.
But I know the truth. There's no going back. You've changed things. Forever.
It's implied in both the movie and in The Long Halloween that it's Batman's very existence that leads to this escalation. But the main inspiration comes in how both the movie and the comic chronicle the fall of the idealistic Harvey Dent and the birth of Two-Face. Christopher Nolan and his brother Jonathan, who co-wrote The Dark Knight Rises, admitted to drawing inspiration from a seemingly unlikely source, Charles Dickens' classic A Tale of Two Cities. In retrospect, though, it seems a bit obvious. At the end, Commissioner Gordon even reads from the book at Bruce Wayne's funeral.
It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done.
In A Tale of Two Cities, one man about to be executed, Charles Darnay, is saved when his identical double, Sidney Carton, takes his place. But not before Carton waxes philosophic about the beautiful city and brilliant people who are rising from the abyss. Sounds a little familiar, right? The one big difference is that the death in the film ends up being more symbolic, as it's Batman who dies so Bruce Wayne can lead a happy, normal life. In addition to drawing from Dickens, The Dark Knight Rises mashes up several different comic storylines. It borrows one basic concept from The Dark Knight Returns, in which an aging Bruce Wayne comes out of retirement to deal with a Gotham that's only gotten worse in his absence. While Bruce Wayne isn't eligible for the senior citizen discount in this movie, the earlier narrative does make a big deal of what it's like for Wayne to return to the role of a hero after 8 years of retirement. The movie also brings in elements of Nightfall, the story arc in which Bane discovered who Batman really was and, after weakening him by unleashing Arkham Asylum's inmates on the city, broke into Wayne Manor and broke his back. In the comics, Batman was out of commission for quite a while, with Caped Crusader duties being taken over by the unstable character of Azrael. The final comic inspiration was No Man's Land, a story that saw Gotham City impacted by an enormous earthquake. In response, the government, and one can only assume they were just waiting for a chance to do something like this, destroyed all bridges into Gotham and prevented other access to it, declaring the entire city a no man's land. Citizens can't get out, and the villains decide to take over. The movie inverts this, of course, with Bane and his crew cutting the city off, but the narrative of trying to survive in isolation and surrounded by psychopaths remains. It's tough at this point to imagine Batman without Nolan's trilogy. However, before he brought the world into focus with Batman Begins, there were a number of false starts, while Warner Brothers spent a decade trying to figure out where they wanted to take the franchise. An explicit live-action adaptation of The Dark Knight Returns was scrapped, and Batman Year One was nearly adapted twice. Amusingly, one of these scrapped movies included Batman vs. Superman, which very nearly came out in 2004. Perhaps the weirdest movie planned was the studio's second attempt at a Batman Year Year One adaptation. It would have been directed by Darren Aronofsky, famous for movies such as Requiem for a Dream, with a screenplay by Aronofsky and Batman Year One comic writer Frank Miller. In the story, Bruce Wayne is a poor kid taken in and raised by a mechanic on the wrong side of the tracks. He becomes an unhinged vigilante in the style of Taxi Driver's Travis Bickle, later an inspiration for 2019's Joker. The story was also set to feature an unhinged, violent, and somewhat suicidal Jim Gordon. Fortunately, the project was axed, paving the way for our familiar Dark Knight trilogy to unfold. Months before Ledger's death, Christian Bale praised his co-star's commitment to his role during an interview. Referencing the scene when Batman confronts Joker in the GCPD interrogation room, Bale told THR that Heath Ledger insisted that he hit him for real.
Never start with the head. The victim gets all fuzzy.
Apparently, the physical punishment didn't end with the beating Ledger took. Bale went on to describe Ledger, quote, slamming himself around, and there were tiled walls inside of that set which were cracked and dented from him hurling himself into them. Throughout the Dark Knight trilogy, the most noticeable casting change is Bruce Wayne's old friend and love interest, Rachel Dawes. Created specifically for the film trilogy and not appearing in the comics, Dawes is played by Katie Holmes in Batman Begins, but is replaced by Maggie Gyllenhaal in The Dark Knight. The change led to speculation that Holmes, whose performance wasn't met with the most enthusiastic reviews, was the victim of harsh critics. Christopher Nolan denied this, saying Holmes simply was not available for The Dark Knight. It took 8 years, but Holmes finally broke her silence about it to confirm her absence in The Dark Knight was her own choice, and went on to praise Gyllenhaal for doing, quote, a wonderful job. She didn't explain her reasons for leaving the franchise, though. Maybe she just didn't want to be blown up by an evil clown. As for Gyllenhaal, she wanted to be sure that it was Holmes' decision too. She reportedly reached out to ask for Holmes' blessing before giving a firm yes to replacing her as Rachel Dawes. Christopher Nolan is known for going to great lengths to keep plot points of his films secret, and the Dark Knight trilogy was no exception. How does Nolan achieve this level of secrecy? Well, apparently he tells his actors the bare minimum they need to know. Ask Liam Neeson. He tapped Neeson to reprise his role as Ra's al Ghul for a cameo in 2012's Dark Knight Rises, and apparently told the actor absolutely nothing about the film. He later said in an interview that it wasn't that he didn't want to discuss the plot, but that he couldn't, because he literally didn't know anything about it. Neeson may have only had a small part in Dark Knight Rises, but as the butler, Alfred Pennyworth, Michael Caine was a significant part of Batman Begins, and he got similar treatment when asked to appear. Caine said that Nolan appeared at his door personally with the draft for Batman Begins and asked if he was interested in playing Alfred. Nolan just sat there while Caine read the script and then took it with him when he left. Over the years, a handful of actors have given us memorable performances as Alfred Pennyworth, but while tastes will always differ, you'd have a rough time arguing that anyone has done a better job of embodying Alfred than Michael Caine. The actor gave us an Alfred who would go to any lengths to support Bruce Wayne's efforts to save Gotham, while at the same time desperately wanting nothing more than for Wayne to give up the cowl and cape so he can find some true commitment. Surprisingly, it came close to not happening. In fact, Caine has admitted that when he was initially approached about the role as Alfred, he was not at all enthused, saying, quote, I thought that wasn't a very good part. I'll be saying dinner is served, and would you like a coffee? Presumably, Caine was thinking of previous versions of the character, like the late Michael Gough of the Tim Burton, Joel Schumacher films, whose portrayal of the character showed no signs of ever hunting jewel thieves in the jungles of Burma.
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
Thankfully, Caine learned Nolan had bigger plans for his character, although his early hesitation became a running joke between him and Nolan. He told the Huffington Post that in 2011, Nolan sent him a Christmas present, a dinner gong with "dinner is served" engraved on it. One enduring superhero trope is the hero having to fight some kind of reflection of himself, like Ironmonger in Iron Man, or the Yellow Jacket in Ant-Man, or a lot of Marvel movies actually. Well, shortly after the release of The Dark Knight, Batman was called out by Batman.
Are you the real Batman?
No.
No. No.
In November 2008, Variety reported that the town of Batman, Turkey, was suing Christopher Nolan and Warner Brothers for using the town name without permission. There was no explanation as to why then Batman mayor Hussein Kalkan was not also suing DC Comics, Tim Burton, Joel Schumacher, or anyone else involved in the numerous Batman television shows, movies, and animated series over the years. However, Kalkan did level some ridiculous-sounding charges at The Dark Knight, including blaming its influence for unsolved killings in the area. there's no word on the outcome of the mayor's efforts, though we have a tough time believing we wouldn't have heard something if the lawsuit went anywhere significant. We do, however, know that at least one part of the country has patched things up with the Caped Crusader. Turkish Airlines had some significant product placement in Batman vs. Superman, and even used Bruce Wayne in an ad announcing Gotham City as their newest destination. In other words, customers in the DC universe can now fly to Batman with Batman. Nestor Carbonell, who appears as the mayor of Gotham in both The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, has a singular distinction in The Dark Knight trilogy. Like Christian Bale, he also played Batman, kind of. More of a parody of Batman. Before The Dark Knight trilogy, there was the Fox Network's 2001 live-action version of The Tick, based on the superhero spoof comic of the same name by Ben Edlund. Among the Tick's allies in the show was Batmanuel, played by Carbonell. Like Batman, Batmanuel doesn't appear to have any kind of superpowers. Unlike Batman, Batmanuel also doesn't seem to have any other abilities that make him good at fighting crime. As far as we know, there were no plans for the mayor of Gotham revealing he was secretly planning to become a Caped Crusader like Batman, and that's probably the best choice for everybody. You may recall the scene toward the beginning of The Dark Knight when Bruce Wayne goes to Lucius Fox for upgrades to the Batsuit, specifically asking to be able to move his head. You'd think it would be a fairly small thing to ask, right? If you're constantly fighting crowds of criminals and ninjas, you should be able to look around. No, the 1989 version of Batman couldn't do it, but this is the 21st century, and supersuit technology has to have advanced a little bit. So it may surprise you to learn that there's another very basic function that Christian Bale's Batsuit didn't often allow him to do: breathe. Bale said that the cowl was so tight that he would have to take it off after every couple of takes just to catch his breath, which might explain why he had such a hard time fighting Bane. Apparently, this was a bigger problem during the production of Batman Begins than it was on the set of The Dark Knight Rises, though. It seems that by 2012, Wayne Industries finally mastered the fine art of making clothes that won't strangle the people wearing them. In The Dark Knight, Batman's journey to Hong Kong doesn't last that long, but it's arguably the most controversial sequence of the entire film. In 2007, Christopher Nolan denied reports that he changed The Dark Knight because of Hong Kong water pollution. An unnamed member of the production team had said that originally Batman was supposed to jump out of an airplane into Hong Kong's Victoria Harbor, but that was changed when the team tested the water and found it to be full of contagious diseases. The following week, Nolan said he was the one who changed the script, but that it had nothing to do with water pollution, quipping that as a director, he wouldn't mind dipping his actors into a little dirty water anyway. A little over a year later, Warner Brothers announced The Dark Knight would not screen in China and that they hadn't even submitted the film to government censors for consideration. The studio didn't elaborate, but the issues in question are widely believed to revolve around the Hong Kong sequence. There's the simple fact that it involves a Chinese money launderer, and then there's the cameo from Edison Chen, a Hong Kong singer who at the time was embroiled in a scandal involving explicit photos leaked on the web.
Movies like Batman Begins and Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice are full of scenes lifted directly from the pages of DC Comics. Here's a look at some Batman moments that will never be on the big screen. Messiah of the Crimson Sun. If you've ever wished the James Bond flick Moonraker had starred Batman instead, then boy, do we have a story for you. Appearing in Batman Annual Number 8, Messiah of the Crimson Sun involves Ra's al Ghul making a giant space laser. But after commandeering a space shuttle and engaging in some zero-gravity karate, Batman defeated the leader of the League of Assassins by tractor beaming him into the laser blast. Considering the days of high camp seem to be in Batman's distant past, it's pretty unlikely we'll ever see this one on screen. The Hunchback of the Batcave.
Where does it get those wonderful toys?
In the movies, The Dark Knight's seemingly endless arsenal of crime-fighting equipment was either provided by Lucius Fox or made down in the Batcave by Alfred and Batman himself. It's a pretty good answer, as long as you don't think about it too hard. Why nobody down in Wayne Tech R&D realizes they spend an unusual amount of time sewing up wearable hang glider capes and bat-shaped boomerangs is anyone's guess. But honestly, it actually makes way more sense than what we got in the comics. See, in the comics, all this stuff came courtesy of a hunchbacked mute mechanical genius who lived in the Batcave and spent his life building crap for Batman. This modern-day high-tech Quasimodo was named Harold Allnut, and while he was essential to keeping the Batcave operation going, he almost never got any screen time at all, until he was unceremoniously murdered. The less said about Allnut, the better. Trial of the Bat Witch. Want to know the real reason Batman and Superman seem to always be at each other's throats? Well, one unlikely explanation was provided in the pages of 1969's World's Finest, number 186, where the Man of Steel and the Dark Knight head back in time to find out why real-life Revolutionary War hero Mad Anthony Wayne looks like Batman. The answer, of course, is that they're related, but along the way, Superman claims to be a traveling actor by announcing that the S on his chest stands for Shakespeare, and then sets about convincing the good people of 1776 that Batman is a witch. This might seem out of character for Superman, but there's actually a really good reason for it. He was possessed by a genie. Obviously, Nocturna. Hey, remember the time Batman had a custody battle with a vampire over who got to raise Robin? No? Well, let us introduce you to Nocturna. After adopting Jason Todd, who was Robin at the time, this bloodthirsty arch-criminal then tried to convince Batman that Robin could only be raised properly if they got married. A supernatural rom-com version of Kramer vs. Kramer with Robin stuck in the middle? Hey, someone called Katherine Heigl. A Christmas Story. If you think the story of Christmas begins with a manger, well, you've clearly never read Batman, the Brave and the Bold, number 12, which features the insane tale of how Christmas truly came to be. The story starts with Earth being destroyed and just gets weirder from there. By the end of it, Batman and his partner Adam Strange end up literally rebuilding the universe from within a reality-altering antimatter stream, coincidentally made up of glowing red and green balls of light that twists their bodies. Strange ends up being stretched out and aged, with his rotund, bearded appearance imprinting on the subconscious mind of the rebuilt universe, creating the idea of Santa Claus. And Batman, well, Batman is actually his elf helper. Please make this into a movie. Professor Gorilla. Batman has so many iconic enemies, from the Joker, Catwoman and Penguin to Poison Ivy, Two-Face and the Riddler, that the movies just don't seem to have room for some of his lesser known adversaries, which is too bad because that means we'll probably never see Professor Gorilla in a movie. Originally appearing in the Batman manga by Jiro Kuwata that ran in Japan's Shonen Ace magazine in the 1960s, Professor Gorilla was, well, he was exactly what he sounds like. A gorilla who gained genius-level human intelligence and then tried to exact revenge on the entire human race. Hey, if they're going to keep making Planet of the Apes films, they might as well put Batman in one. Robin dies at dawn. If you were looking for a great story that dealt with the psychological trauma of being Batman, you could do a lot worse than to go back to the 1963 classic, Robin Dies at Dawn. Arguably the best Batman story of the decade, Robin Dies at Dawn shows a Batman who's struggling with the paralyzing fear that his life as a superhero will inevitably lead only to more death and suffering, specifically to Robin's death, which would cause Batman to lose his only family a second time. This crazy story begins with Batman thwarting aliens in space before fighting criminals while wearing a gorilla costume over his batsuit. So it has that going for it too. Unfortunately for modern film fans, some things are so awesome they can only exist in the silver age of comics. Sorry Rainbow Batman and Batbaby.
Dark, dismal, and as realistic as it gets, Joker gives the Batman mythos a whole slew of updates that makes everything feel more grounded in the real world, and in many ways, more effective. These are just a few of the things that Joker does better than any other Batman movie. Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Arthur Fleck is more relatable than any other clown prince we've met on the big screen. We all know what it's like to imagine romantic lives with those who don't reciprocate, to fantasize about being heralded in a world of fame, and to be recognized for being special. We don't, thankfully, all respond as Fleck does when those desires aren't fulfilled. But still, getting to know Arthur gives us something we've never had with any other Joker, an understanding of why he becomes and remains the Joker. Cesar Romero Romero's Joker of the 60s television show was, like the rest of that series' antagonists, just a crook with a particular theme. The origins of Heath Ledger's Joker are a mystery in The Dark Knight, and his motivations seem to change from scene to scene. We get to meet Jack Napier before he becomes Joker in 1989's Batman, but it doesn't help make the character more relatable. He was always kind of a huge homicidal jerk. Obviously, Christopher Nolan and Tim Burton had different priorities when making their respective films than Todd Phillips did with Joker, but as MCU villains like Tom Hiddleston's Loki and Josh Brolin's Thanos have taught us, the more we can relate to a supervillain, the more we enjoy their portrayal. We briefly meet some of the Wayne family in Joker. Thomas Wayne is running for mayor, Arthur Fleck gets the opportunity to meet his future nemesis Bruce Wayne as a young boy, and we even briefly meet the butler Alfred Pennyworth. Particularly in the case of Thomas Wayne, the versions we see of the characters in Joker aren't quite the saints Bruce Wayne usually remembers in the various movies.
Is this a joke to you?
Out of touch and condescending, dismissive, insulting, and even violent toward Arthur Fleck, this version of Thomas Wayne is refreshing and feels genuine, especially compared to other incarnations of the guy. For example, Linus Roach's version of Thomas Wayne in 2005's Batman Begins seems so beyond reproach he's practically a cartoon character. He does nothing but selflessly give to Gotham, offer unassailable wisdom to his son, and even in his dying breaths, worry about nothing beyond Bruce's well-being. To be fair, it makes sense Bruce Wayne's memory of his father is viewed through rose-colored glasses, but seeing more depth and flaws to him makes him more than a faceless ghost fueling Batman's crusade. Joker always has his followers. Usually they're professional criminals, like in 1989's Batman and 2008's The Dark Knight. But in Joker, Arthur Fleck doesn't recruit anybody, at least not on purpose. After he kills 3 men on a subway, the news inspires the impoverished and powerless of Gotham to see him as a symbol of resistance. Gotham protesters regularly wear clown masks as a symbol of rebellion, and by the end of the film, his followers rescue him from the police and worship him like a newborn god. The clown-masked protesters of Gotham are not the mindless, disposable henchmen of the other movies, which is exactly why it's more believable they would come to see Joker as their leader. They rightly feel betrayed and forgotten by Gotham, and Joker offers them an empowering alternative. It may not be the healthiest choice, but it makes more sense than hardened ex-cons saying, "Sure, I'll dress like a mime for a guy who might murder me for a gag tomorrow." The Gotham City of Joker feels more like a city situated somewhere in the real world than any of its other big-screen incarnations. The Gotham of 1989's Batman and its 1992 sequel Batman Returns was an imposing gothic nightmare. Joel Schumacher's version in 1995's Batman Forever and the 1997 hate magnet Batman and Robin add some absurd day-glow to the city, making it seem that much more cartoonish. Gotham, like its lighter reflection Metropolis, is really just New York City with a different name, and in Joker, it's never been more clear that that's exactly what it is. Christopher Nolan's trilogy gave us a Gotham closer to the real world than what we saw in the Burton-Schumacher films, but Joker gets it perfect by simply giving us New York City and calling it Gotham instead. If there's one thing every version of the Joker shares, it's a penchant for violence. The Joker of 1989's Batman kills in unbelievable, cartoonish ways. It's easy to laugh when he electrocutes a rival mob boss and poisons Gotham's population to make them die with gruesome forced grins just like his own, because none of it feels real.
With new Joker brand, I get a grin again and again.
In some cases, like when he gasses an entire museum full of patrons and employees, we don't even know if he kills anyone or just knocks them out, and it hardly seems to matter. Heath Ledger's Joker in 2008's The Dark Knight is certainly less cartoonish than Nicholson's depiction, but in many ways, his violence doesn't feel right. While Ledger's performance is often intimate and chilling, the situations he's put in often feel more like a Michael Bay film than they should, like when he's firing at police cruisers with a missile launcher from the side of an 18-wheeler. Once Arthur Fleck turns to violence in Joker, however, it's a kind of violence that not only feels more genuine to the real world, but for the Joker himself. Arthur Fleck's violence is brutal and without the Hollywood sheen of big-budget action flicks. It's non-stylized and viscerally jarring.
Batman's secret identity is the most closely guarded secret in the DC universe. No one must ever know! Well, except Alfred, of course, and all the Robins, and Batgirl, and Superman, and the Justice League, and probably Commissioner Gordon. No villains, though! Except for Ra's al Ghul, and Talia, and Catwoman, Hush, Dr. Hurt, well, you get the idea. Beyond them, however, no one must ever know, which is why Bruce Wayne has gotten to some pretty strange extremes in order to keep people from figuring out how he spends his nights. Here are some truly bizarre ways that Batman has kept his identity a secret. The Bodyguard. Gotham City is a pretty dangerous town, and if you're one of its high-profile billionaires, you're bound to wind up as a target sooner or later. That's why the Wayne Industries Board of Directors decided to hire a bodyguard for the CEO. Sacha Bordeaux made her first appearance in Detective Comics issue 751, taking the job as working as a bodyguard for the last person in the world who actually needed one. At first, Bruce played up his disguise as a flaky socialite in an attempt to make Sasha so frustrated that she'd quit. But once she discovered his secret identity, everything changed. Since she was still dedicated to protecting him, she insisted on joining him on his missions as Batman, and he decided to train her as a sidekick with a mask and costume of her own. Despite the fact that she performed pretty admirably in the role, her tenure ended disastrously when Bruce Wayne was framed for murder and she was arrested as an accessory. She was seemingly killed in prison and then wound up as a cybernetic super spy working for an intelligence agency called Checkmate. You know you've got a weird resume when Batman's bodyguard isn't the strangest thing on it. Batman Incorporated. The thing about Batman's secret identity is that it's not actually that hard to figure out, since everyone already knows that he drives around Gotham City in a rocket-powered supercar. Once you have that, it's pretty easy to connect it to the local billionaire whose parents were murdered in front of him as a child. In 2010, however, Bruce Wayne used all those obvious connections to his advantage. Rather than revealing himself as Batman, he instead announced that he'd been the one financing the Caped Crusader, using his vast personal fortune to provide Gotham's resident vigilante with all the grappling hooks, batarangs, and Batmobiles he needs. And technically, that's true, even if it leaves out one pretty important detail. Evil Twin. After Batman appeared to die in the pages of Final Crisis, Dick Grayson took over the role, but that left the question of what to do about Batman and Bruce Wayne dying at the same time. Fortunately, they had Dr. Tommy Elliot, better known as the supervillain Hush. See, Elliot was so obsessed with his childhood friend Bruce Wayne that he ended up performing plastic surgery on his own face in order to turn himself into Wayne's exact double. With Batman gone, he was running around pretending to be Bruce Wayne, depleting the Wayne fortune as fast as he could. To solve the problem, Batman's allies decided to let him keep up the ruse, recruiting a massive roster of other superheroes posed as employees and assistants to keep him in line long enough for the real Batman to return from a trip through the time stream. King Batman I. Okay, this is when things start to get weird. Back in the 50s, Batman and Robin found themselves transported through a random time warp to the planet Plaxius, where Batman was unmasked when he accidentally became king. Initially, Batman figured out that there was no harm in revealing his identity to an alien world, but the criminal he and Robin had been chasing when they got hit with the time warp was also there, and more than willing to spill the beans when he got back to Earth. While this entire problem could be avoided by just leaving the criminal back on Plaxius to face interdimensional space justice, that's a little too far from due process, even for Batman. Instead, Batman and Robin decided that the best way to protect their identities was to jump right back into another random time warp, which fortunately wiped everyone's memories of the entire story. Funny how that works. Bat ventriloquism. Batman has done a lot of weird things to protect his secret, but the climax of the conquest of Batman's identity might be the wildest of all. It starts when detective novelist J.J. Jason tries to find a bit of inspiration by solving the most challenging mystery he can think of, figuring out who's behind Batman's mask. He studies footprints, analyzes a piece of Batman's cape, and even gathers up a soil sample from the Batcave to conclusively prove that Batman is Bruce Wayne. When he confronts Bruce about it though, the result isn't what he expects. It's not what anyone expects. Like several other stories like this, Batman relies on a stand-in wearing his costume to throw people off the track. Superman's done it a few times, for instance, and Robin has a special costume with built-in stilts just for such an occasion. Even Alfred did it once, although for obvious reasons, that usually only works from a distance. This time though, a stand-in Batman is blind and deaf and speaks to Jason via Batman using ventriloquism. The fake Batman, also completely unnamed, is never ever mentioned again. Literally nothing. At the climax of 2002's Hush, it's revealed that Tommy Elliot wasn't working alone. Instead, the real foe behind a complicated plot that involved almost every major Batman villain was the Riddler, who had finally figured out Batman's secret identity. Considering that the Riddler is one of Batman's more enduring foes, this seems like a pretty big deal. In that same issue, however, Batman convinces him not to tell anyone, arguing that riddles are worthless if everyone knows the answer. Of course, that conveniently ignores the fact that it's also pretty worthless to solve a riddle when nobody else knows you've done it. But eventually it all worked out. Before too long, the Riddler completely forgot Batman's identity thanks to a sharp blow to the head and a bout of amnesia, which might be Batman's true superpower, the unstoppable power of coincidence.
Despite their vast differences in style and tone throughout the decades, every Batman movie tends to pull from the same handful of references and plot points again and again, to the point where you can pretty much set your Batwatch by them. Hey, did you know Bruce Wayne's parents were shot by a mugger in front of him when he was a kid? If you didn't, it's safe to assume that you've never seen a movie about the Dark Knight, because it comes up a lot. Seriously, we've had more scenes of Thomas and Martha Wayne being gunned down in an alley over the years than we've had Batmobiles. Admittedly, that makes a lot of sense. Along with the bats that inspired Bruce to put on a costume in order to strike fear into the superstitious, cowardly lot that is Gotham City's criminal underworld, it's the single most important thing about his origin story. Still, once you've seen it happen for the 5th or 6th time, it starts to lose its impact, even if each version tries to add something new. Tim Burton's 1989 Batman film makes it a major plot point by casting the murderer as the crook who would eventually become the Joker. Batman Forever shows the murderers multiple times as part of a story where the Riddler is stealing memories. Batman Begins replaces the traditional movie theater with an opera house, and even shows us the trial of a remorseful Joe Chill, something that's never really been done in another Batman story.
Yana, not a day goes by that I don't wish I could take back what I did.
Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice leans into slow-motion close-ups and puts a spin on it by having bats burst out of Martha Wayne's tomb. The one Batman film that doesn't feature the Wayne's murders is, of course, Batman the Movie, which ties into the 1966 Adam West TV series. In fact, in the show's entire 120-episode run, plus the movie, the killing is only ever mentioned once, in the pilot.
Perhaps if there'd been anti-crime centers of the type you now propose when my own parents were murdered by dastardly criminals.
It seems like Warner Brothers finally made up for that in 2018 when they included what might just be the darkest and most hilarious take on the Wayne murders in the kid-friendly Teen Titans Go to the Movies. Who knew Robin was that stone cold? More than any other superhero, Batman has an incredible roster of compelling villains, with a deep bench that goes from worldwide threats like Ra's al Ghul to sinister nuisances like the Riddler, and even classic anti-heroes like Catwoman, who have become main characters worthy of a spotlight in their own right. They're the best bad guys in comics. As a result, the Batman movies are always eager to introduce a new villain, and almost all of them make sure to dive into their origin stories.
Jack is dead, my friend. You can call me Joker.
The big exception is, of course, Batman 66, where all 4 baddies are already well-known arch-criminals, just like they are on the show. The rest of them, however, go hard at origins. Batman 89 doesn't just show us the Joker going into a vat of acid, it gives us his complete backstory as the underling of a mob boss, complete with its own web of double crosses.
You are my #1 guy.
Batman Returns does even more. Not only do we see Selina Kyle's breakdown and re-emergence as Catwoman, we also get the Penguin's literal life story, from infancy to death. Batman Begins shows us the Scarecrow's transition from weirdo doctor to full-on supervillain. And Batman and Robin? That movie actually does this 4 times, giving us the origin of Poison Ivy, a backstory for Mr. Freeze that explains why he looks like a bodybuilder, a beginning for Bane, and if you want to get technical about it, it even has an origin story for Jason Woodrue, the Floronic Man. It's easy to point to The Dark Knight as a movie that studiously avoids giving its major villain a backstory, as the Joker gives a few conflicting versions of his past to preserve his mystery. Instead, it's a film focused on the origin of supervillainy itself. In addition to giving us a full origin for Two-Face, it also shows the Joker's first reign of terror in Gotham City, which ends up being the end of traditional organized crime and a beginning for costume supercriminals. For decades, Alfred Pennyworth was Batman's loyal and somewhat bumbling butler. With a few notable exceptions, however, the movies tend to avoid introducing Robin, and Alfred became one of the only people that Batman can speak to casually. As a result, he became a sarcastic comedic foil for the very serious Dark Knight. The clearest example of this is probably Michael Caine's portrayal of Alfred in the Dark Knight Trilogy, who seems to delight in throwing shade at Batman and pretty much everyone else.
Did you get mauled by a tiger?
It was a dog.
Huh?
It was a big dog.
It's definitely present across all versions, though. The Jeremy Irons version from Batman vs. Superman is the only counterbalance to the movie's otherwise all-consuming grimness. Michael Gough's Alfred revels in dunking on the Caped Crusader by telling embarrassing childhood stories about Bruce Wayne to his potential girlfriend. Come on, man, let the guy have a couple of secrets. Batman's identity is one of his most important secrets. Bruce Wayne is, after all, a very public figure whose home address is pretty easy to figure out. So if his enemies ever discovered exactly who was underneath that mask, he'd be in a whole lot of trouble. And there's also the fact that being a vigilante is technically extremely illegal, no matter how many custom-made spotlights you mount on top of the police station. And yet, every time Batman hits the silver screen, the whole secret part of his identity goes right out the window. The Dark Knight trilogy might actually be the most egregious in this regard. Ra's al Ghul knew from the very beginning. Rachel Dawes figures it out thanks to Batman repeating a familiar phrase, and even some random dude who works at Wayne Enterprises notices that Batman's exclusively using stuff that should be down in the warehouse. In Batman 89, Alfred just walks Vicky Bale down to the Batcave one afternoon, which not only blows his secret identity, but also forces her to see the unforgettable sight of Batman wearing mom jeans. In Batman Forever, the Riddler learns it by literally stealing Bruce Wayne's memories and then using the information to blow up the Batcave. Justice League even features a scene where the extremely famous Bruce Wayne is just hanging out in public with Aquaman, talking about being Batman. All of that can be forgiven though, because it also gives us the single greatest moment of Batman Returns, and one of the best scenes in any Batman movie. When Batman pulls off his mask to make a heartfelt plea to Catwoman, Max Schreck, played by Christopher Walken, reacts the way most of us would in that moment.
Why are you dressed up like Batman?
Because he is Batman, you moron.
With all the chaos in Gotham City, it isn't shocking that a few mistakes have been made by the filmmakers who've brought The Dark Knight to the big screen. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes lurking in the Batman movies? Caught red-handed. When the Joker orders his cronies to destroy everything in Gotham's museum during Tim Burton's Batman, one henchman gleefully smacks a bunch of red handprints all over a painting. But in the very next frame, the graffiti has magically disappeared and he's back to defacing a painting from earlier. Mums everywhere would probably like to know where he got those washable paints. Joker's bloody chin. Moments before he plummets from a helicopter, the Joker is visibly bloody from his mouth to his chin. And although the fall kills him, a close-up shot reveals it somehow did miracles for his beauty regimen. Selina's rearranging kitchen. Single lady Selina Kyle is in such a rush when she runs out of her apartment that she forgets to put the milk back in the fridge. But when she returns after her little accident, the carton is nowhere to be seen and the dishes in the drying rack are moved around too. Did her cats tidy up, or did the milk have an even weirder night than she did? That's not the only weird thing going on in her apartment. Soon after the scene, Selina starts to assemble her Catwoman costume, brandishing a pair of blue scissors. Or are they pink? Maybe it's Maybelline. As Batman prepares to reveal his identity to Catwoman in Batman Returns, he's seen with his usual dark eye makeup surrounding his eyes. But after a quick cutaway, it's suddenly gone. This is because he's about to remove his mask, and apparently it was about 25 years too early for this look. Ivy's vanishing gloves. Batman and Robin from 1997. It had a lot of problems, and simple continuity was one of them. Seated in the backseat of a limousine driven by Bane, Poison Ivy is clearly wearing black gloves when she begins to put on a wig. However, in the next shot, her gloves are gone. Just another victim of Joel Schumacher's madness. The spiked bracelets. That wasn't the only time Poison Ivy's arms were the victim of bad continuity. She's wearing thin, leaf-like gloves when she first welcomes Robin into her lair. But when she angrily pushes him into a gross swimming pool, she's suddenly wearing spiky rubber bracelets. The transporting gun. In Batman Begins, Bruce Wayne is waiting at the courthouse to shoot Joe Chill, the man who killed his parents. A female assassin runs up and pushes a pistol up against the criminal's chest instead. When she shoots a split second later, she's holding the gun at least a foot away. Not even Batman moves that fast.
Where are you?
Joker's fast hands. During the iconic interrogation scene in The Dark Knight, the Joker and Batman tangle while the Gotham City Police Department looks on. But it seems like they got a little more tangled than anyone expected. As Batman holds Joker up against a wall, Joker holds onto Batman's arms with a chin-up grip. But when the camera angle changes, the Clown Prince is doing a pull-up instead, before his hands quickly return to their first position. The botched headline. Gotham's copy editors should probably get fired for this one, or at least the props department. In The Dark Knight Rises, Bruce Wayne stumbles upon a newspaper headline while conducting some online research about the cat burglar in town, where the word heist is clearly misspelled. I guess it could have been worse.
Despite the declining success of the Batman film franchise in the 90s, Warner Brothers knew that in the right hands, the character was still a goldmine. Even though two-time Batman director Joel Schumacher was interested in making another installment, the studio wanted to start fresh. That's how Darren Aronofsky got a deal to pen a screenplay with Frank Miller to adapt Miller's comic Batman Year One. That story arc was eventually made as an animated film, but Aronofsky and Miller's screenplay never got developed. Here's why we never got to see it. A Darker Night. The Year One comic follows Bruce Wayne's return to Gotham after 12 years of travel and training. He befriends a young Jim Gordon, and the two take down gangsters within Carmine Falcone's mob organization. Despite citing Year One as their inspiration, Aronofsky and Miller changed a lot of aspects of the comic for the screenplay, such as making young Bruce Wayne live as a bum while learning how to fight crime from books. The big takeaway, according to Miller, was that the script just strayed too far from the traditional Batman storylines and included elements that took the film in some dark directions. Considering PG-13 is as far as Warner Brothers has ever gone with Batman, this new take on Batman was just too far from family-friendly. Bait and switch. Darren Aronofsky later admitted that he was never particularly interested in making a Batman movie. He was trying to make a different movie, and he saw Year One as a way to get the studio behind his indie effort. He explained, "It was a kind of bait-and-switch strategy. I was working on Requiem for a Dream, and I got a phone call that Warner Brothers wanted to talk about Batman. At the time, I had this idea for a film called The Fountain, which I knew was going to be this big movie. My theory was if I can write this Batman film and they can perceive me as a writer for it, then maybe they let me go ahead." Even though the Batman movie never materialized, Warner Brothers did finally give him funding to make The Fountain in 2006, so at least some good came out of the whole thing. Tough cast. According to the book Tales from Development Hell, Aronofsky's original pitch is what intrigued Warner Brothers enough to give him a crack at the Caped Crusader. Aronofsky's idea was to take the movie in a gritty, realistic direction, and his main choice for the dark, gritty hero? Clint Eastwood.
You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
Dirty Harry in a bad suit sounds like a great idea, but that casting decision didn't pan out. Aronofsky then settled on Year One as his source material, and according to a 2017 Yahoo interview, he wanted to cast Joaquin Phoenix as the younger Bruce Wayne. Neither of his casting choices seemed to give Warner Brothers much confidence, and Aronofsky later suggested that the entire concept might have just been too far ahead of its time. Inexperienced. With only RoboCop 2 and RoboCop 3 as screenwriting credits, at this point, Frank Miller admitted he had a lot to learn about the movie business. He explained, "The whole process was one of discovery for me. I had to figure out what they wanted. Normally, somebody like me, if you say you want to make a movie, I'll come up with something that will be 12 hours long and cost $1 billion to make." Premature prequel. Even without the gritty R-rated tone the two filmmakers wanted for Year One, there's a chance the movie would have eventually been canned anyway. Prequels and spin-offs may be a big market now, but in 1999, most movie studios preferred to bank on sequels to keep a franchise going. So when Aronofsky and Miller decided to wipe out the entire Batman film timeline to start fresh with Year One, the studio may have been hesitant. Ultimately, the possibility of new toys and merchandise might have been the deciding factor in Warner Brothers agreeing to start working on the film, although that angle didn't pan out either. Toy bust. After giving Warner Brothers his and Aronofsky's script, Miller quickly realized that Batman Year One probably wasn't going to pan out. Describing how the studio reacted, he said, "I think I heard a shriek of horror at first. They were shocked at how bold it was." In other words, it wasn't going to be a movie that sold a lot of toys. Miller spelled it out clearly when he recalled being told that the project wasn't moving forward. The executive wanted to do a Batman he could take his kids to, and this wasn't that. It didn't have the toys in it.
Who defends this city?
Batman and Robin.
And that's ultimately what sunk Year One. Warner Brothers didn't feel like it was the right fit for a Burger King tie-in. That's too bad, because it definitely sounds like the best Batman film we never saw.
From the hero's origins to centuries of injustice, the Dark Knight trilogy possesses a gritty yet fascinating world. Here we'll explore the history of Bruce Wayne and his more realistic rogues gallery, and how 3 films made us believe a man could, not fly but do wingsuit stuff. In a chaotic world, it can be comforting to imagine that there's a singular force behind history's most horrifying events. Organizations so powerful and secretive that they can hide in plain sight while pulling the metaphorical strings of a society. In the Dark Knight trilogy, those theories would be entirely well-founded, since an enigmatic group known as the League of Shadows has been molding civilization for more than 1,000 years. Their theory is that when a great nation becomes too large and decadent, it needs to be purged like an overgrown forest. Secrecy is their calling card, but we're given a few glimpses of the League's actions over the centuries through their leader Ra's al Ghul.
We sacked Rome, loaded trade ships with plague rats, burned London to the ground.
His former claim likely refers to the attack on the Roman former capital in 410 AD by the Visigoths, an event that led in part to the fall of the Roman Empire. But Ra's al Ghul further implies that the League retained power through the 14th and 17th centuries. Around the early to mid-80s, a young Ra's al Ghul, then a mercenary for hire, falls in love with the daughter of a powerful warlord. The warlord orders that Ra's is to be thrown into an infamous prison known only as the Pit, a deep hole in an unnamed but ancient country. The warlord's daughter arranges to take the place of Ra's in exchange for his freedom, never letting Ra's or her father know. A few months later, also without Raz's knowledge, she gives birth to his child, a girl named Talia. The girl's mother is attacked and killed by fellow inmates a short time later, and Talia falls under the protection of Bane, a man who's spent his entire life in the Pit. As a young girl, Talia attains a legendary status among the Pit's prisoners when she becomes the first inmate to successfully escape. While she climbs to freedom, Bane holds back the other enraged prisoners and is gruesomely disfigured in the process. Talia tracks down her father, now a high-level figure in the League of Shadows, and he goes to the Pit, executing the people responsible for his lover's death and extracting Bane, recruiting him for the League and treating his injuries with the use of a mask that continually doses him with pain suppressants. Far away from the Pit, on the other side of the world, the League of Shadows' plot to cause an economic collapse in Gotham is thrown off by an unforeseen factor: the rise of philanthropist power couple Thomas and Martha Wayne. Thomas, a celebrated surgeon, is also the chairman of Wayne Enterprises, a technology and real estate development company, as well as the head of the charitable Wayne Foundation.
I leave the running of our company to much better men.
Better?
Wow. More interested men.
Thomas and Martha invest heavily in improving Gotham, funding the construction of an elevated train system suspiciously similar to Chicago's L. Ironically, Thomas and Martha succeed in pulling Gotham out of its depression, but only in their deaths. The two are shot and killed in a mugging by a low-level criminal, Joe Chill. The city's elite are inspired into action, helping to clean up Gotham and create a better, if imperfect, place to live, little knowing that this will inspire further, more insidious actions by the League. Joe Chill is hastily arrested for the deaths of Thomas and Martha Wayne, and he spends roughly a decade behind bars. While there, he shares a cell with mob boss Carmine Falcone and manages to glean information on his criminal activities. And that's when Chill decides to become a stool pigeon, exchanging testimony about the gangster for parole. Bruce Wayne attends Chill's hearing with a small revolver in his pocket, intending to kill the man who killed his family. Unbeknownst to Wayne, Falcone has bribed the judge, moving Chill's hearing into a public space so that one of Falcone's assassins can get to Chill before Bruce is able to. After a meeting with Falcone and a slap-heavy chewing out from Rachel, Bruce realizes that he's ill-equipped to stop crime in any meaningful way or protect the people he loves.
Now you think, because your mommy and your daddy got shot, you know about the ugly side of life, but you don't.
Burning his identification, Bruce goes off the grid, traveling the world in search of meaning, understanding, and mentorship. He gets that in Bhutan, where he's offered membership in the League of Shadows. Told that the League is a force for order, the world's greatest detective doesn't realize that a group of explosive enthusiast ninjas might be in the business of killing people until his initiation ceremony, during which he's told to take the life of a man who's killed his neighbors. Expressing a philosophy of non-lethal violence, Bruce blows up the League's compound, with everyone still inside, only managing to save his mentor, who he leaves in the care of a local villager. Bruce returns to Gotham, where he befriends experimental weapons designer Lucius Fox, an employee of Wayne Enterprises who outfits him with equipment to combat the city's criminal element.
What's that? Well, the tumbler? Oh, you wouldn't be interested in that.
Creating the Batman persona and initiating an uneasy partnership with Detective James Gordon, Bruce stops a fresh League of Shadows plot to release a hallucinogenic neurotoxin developed by local psychiatrist Jonathan Crane. Somewhere around this point, Bruce Wayne visits an orphanage funded by the Wayne Foundation where a young kid named Robin John Blake is living. An angry child, Blake recognizes something in Wayne, anger masked behind a smile.
Not a lot of people know what it feels like, do they? To be angry in your bones.
Blake feels a kinship with Wayne, looking up to him as a hero figure. He deduces that Wayne is probably Batman, and out of either a sense of respect or an understanding of what bat snitches get, doesn't tell anyone. Blake will grow up and move out of the boy's home, eventually becoming one of the rare, incorruptible cops on Gotham City's payroll. There, he'll partner with James Gordon and become entangled in Batman's world of gritty, animal-based vigilantism. At the end of Batman Begins, Gordon informs Batman that his wearing a mask and generally making a scene has led to escalation from the city's criminal element, with one particularly troubling new figure committing a series of crimes and leaving behind a Joker playing card each time. 9 months later, the man calling himself the Joker is still at large. Plus, at a lower rung on the Calamity ladder, Jonathan Crane has fully adopted his Scarecrow persona and is somehow making a living selling recreational fear gas, presumably thanks to the fact that teenagers will try anything these days. With public safety at the forefront of the political landscape, a new district attorney is elected, Harvey Dent, a handsome optimist who gives a recently promoted Lieutenant Gordon the leeway he needs to continue collaborating with Batman. Bruce keeps a watchful eye on the new DA, in part because of the lawyer's romantic involvement with Rachel. As the Joker's crime spree picks up momentum, Bruce decides to focus his efforts on stopping the city's organized crime rings, ironically not seeing the threat inherent in a single exceptional dramatic symbol. His war on the mob opens up Gotham's underworld, leaving it vulnerable to the forces of chaos.
Do I really look like a guy with a plan?
With Batman's attention divided, Joker takes control of Gotham's organized crime, kills a judge and the police commissioner, and reframes the public's perception of Batman. During his reign of terror, Joker kidnaps Rachel and Harvey, killing the former and mutilating the latter, burning off half his face, and driving him into the depths of vengeful, homicidal madness. As a result of these actions, Batman pulls his emergency cord, a high-tech surveillance system that creates a three-dimensional sonar map in real time by employing the use of every cell phone in the city. In the end, the Joker is captured, but Harvey's revenge ride concludes when he kidnaps Gordon's family and holds them at gunpoint. Batman tackles Dent off of a ledge, killing him, and agrees to take the blame for the disgraced DA's string of crimes.
Gotham needs its true hero.
He rides into the night a wanted fugitive, and Harvey's death becomes the precipitating event in the enactment of a series of laws that enable the police to go even tougher on crime, suspending their civil liberties in the name of law and order. During Batman's self-imposed exile, Bruce Wayne works to better Gotham City in ways that rely more on working towards meeting the needs of its citizens by creating a sustainable future and less on punching guys who steal stereos. He helps to fund an exciting clean energy project, but his sense of moral obligation forces him to shutter the experiment after it's revealed that the machine at the center of things could, with a little light tweaking, be turned into a nuclear bomb. After that, nobody sees or hears from Bruce Wayne for 3 years.
But you're not living, you're just waiting, hoping for things to go bad again.
The tough-on-crime laws inspired by the death of Harvey Dent, called the Dent Act, have allowed now Commissioner Gordon to wipe crime off the streets of Gotham, but at a great cost to his conscience. He's drafted a letter of resignation admitting to his and Batman's ruse. He keeps the letter close, but stays on the force, mentoring a young officer, John Blake. Meanwhile, overseas, the League of Shadows has been reformed thanks to 2 leaders, Talia al Ghul and Bane. After years of work, the two begin enacting a plan to finish what their predecessors started and destroy Gotham. John Daggett, a crooked construction company owner, brings Bane to the United States in the hopes of taking over Wayne Enterprises. His plan involves a stock market raid and shady business dealings after first employing Bane to help secure diamond mining rights in Africa. Of course, a merry series of mishaps occur. Daggett is killed by Bane, who's been using the businessman's construction firms to plant explosives all over Gotham. In order to protect Wayne Enterprises from a hostile takeover, Bruce hands control of his company to fellow clean energy enthusiast Miranda Tate, who he doesn't yet realize is in league with the League. Bruce brings the Batman persona out of retirement and with the help of a lithe jewel thief, tracks Bane to Gotham's sewers. However, Selina Kyle, the jewel thief, was working with Bane, who's waiting for Batman. He lays a thick layer of the smackdown on Bats, then has him imprisoned in the pit, where he's tortured with a TV view of the destruction of his beloved city. With Gotham's Dark Knight out of the way, Bane closes off all land entrances to the city, blowing up bridges and tunnels.
Now we come here not as conquerors, but as liberators to return control of this city to the people.
He then drops the truth on the public. Harvey Dent was a killer. The Dent Act was unjust, and Bane has turned Wayne Enterprises' clean energy project into a bomb, which will explode when an unknown Gothamite presses the button. The bomb will explode regardless of whether or not it's triggered, but Bane uses the chaos to impose martial law, releasing the criminals in Blackgate Prison and employing Batman's stolen armory of vehicles. For around 6 months, Gotham is a military state where any crime is punishable by execution. Bruce, meanwhile, is still recovering from his injuries. He learns about the prison's history and makes several attempts to escape the pit, finally sticking the landing the third time. Through unseen means and with no money or resources, he returns to the United States and infiltrates Gotham's blockade. Back in the city he loves, Batman reaches out to the jewel thief who betrayed him before because he has a good feeling about her. Sometimes in a story about a guy who fights crime with animal-shaped boomerangs, you just have to suspend your disbelief.
Impossible.
With the help of the city's surviving police force, Batman and Catwoman go to war with Bane. In yet another twist, it's revealed that Bane was never in charge of the League of Shadows. He was the Darth Vader to the Emperor Palpatine that is Miranda Tate, aka Talia al Ghul. Talia takes off to protect the bomb, while Catwoman takes the opening and explodes Bane with a shot from the bat pod she has on loan. Together, the heroes chase down Talia, and Bruce forces her truck off the road, killing her and really making the audience look back at all those car crashes he's caused over the course of the trilogy with a more skeptical eye towards his no-killing policy. In a final act of bravery, Batman latches the bomb to his snazzy helicopter, making sure we all know that the autopilot is on the fritz and that this is the only way. He flies the explosive out over open water and, with a tug at our heartstrings, blows right up. Or does he? A number of things change in the months following the siege of Gotham. The public's trust in Batman is restored, enough so that a statue of the Caped Crusader is commissioned. Bruce Wayne is pronounced dead, and a token funeral is held, sparsely attended by Alfred, John Blake, Lucius Fox, and James Gordon, who after years of cooperation, finally pieces together that Batman and the only guy in the city who could afford a custom VTOL aircraft might be one and the same person. The Wayne fortune is left to Alfred. Wayne Manor is converted into a home for orphans and at-risk kids. John Blake, recently having left the police force over concerns with its effectiveness, is left with instructions on how to enter the Batcave. This is where we learn his first name is Robin, implying that he will soon possess the least effective secret identity in superhero history. And then Lucius discovers that the aircraft Bruce flew into that long good night actually had its autopilot functions repaired. Sometime later, Alfred goes to get lunch at an Italian cafe that he'd told Bruce about. There, he sees Bruce and Selina enjoying a meal. Is it a dream? The wishful imaginings of an old man? Or did Batman really escape Gotham to start a new life with Catwoman? Well, since we don't see any Inception-style top spinning, we're going to assume that the Dark Knight trilogy concludes with a happy ending.
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.